53 minutes. That's all the time Sophia Bennett had before the most watched race in the world went live. With an $18 million car sitting dead in the garage, 100 engineers standing around it like mourners at a funeral, and not a single person who could explain why. The championship, the investors. 2 years of her life, all of it balanced on a machine that wouldn't breathe. Then someone said the name of a man nobody in that paddock had thought about in years. Drop a comment below with your city. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hit like, stay until the end, and let's begin. The morning started the way most catastrophic mornings do, quietly, with no warning at all. At 6:14 a.m., the sun was already cutting hard across the tarmac at Circuit Valcourt, the kind of bright that made you squint before you'd even had your first coffee. The grandstands were still empty at that hour, but the paddock had been alive since before dawn. Generators hummed, forklifts beeped. The smell of fuel and rubber and machine oil hung in the air like it always did at a race weekend, that particular cocktail of organized chaos that people either love immediately or never understand at all. Inside Garage 7, the Bennett Motorsport team moved with the precision of people who had done this exact thing dozens of times before. Because they had. 14 seasons, 6 constructor podiums, 1 championship, back when Sophia's father was still running the operation. The team had history, and history in racing is worth something, until the morning when suddenly it isn't. Sophia Bennett arrived at 6:30 sharp, wearing her team jacket and the particular expression of someone who had already been awake for 2 hours and wasn't happy about it. She was 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a way that said she wasn't here to be photographed, and eyes that had a habit of seeing things before other people noticed them. It was one of the reasons she'd taken over as CEO at 27. She was fast, she was sharp, and she had inherited her father's ability to read a room before she'd crossed the threshold. "Morning," she said to Marcus, her chief engineer, as she stepped into the garage. Marcus Chen was a 44-year-old man who had the look of someone permanently calculating something. He was already crouched over a laptop when she walked in, and he straightened up with the slightly too casual air of a person trying to look relaxed when they were not. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" "You never ask me that unless something's wrong." She looked past him at the car. "What is it?" He paused just long enough to be damning. "We're having a small issue with car 7. Define small. Another pause. "She won't start." Sophia looked at the car. Car 7, the RS-24, their primary race chassis, the one they'd built the entire season around, sat in the center of the garage under the overhead lights, looking flawless. Carbon fiber gleaming, livery perfect. Every panel aligned with the kind of tolerances that took months of work to achieve. It looked perfect. It was completely, utterly dead. "When did this start?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "We discovered it at 5:40 this morning during the pre-race systems check." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "The car showed normal on all overnight readings. We plugged in for the start sequence and got nothing. No ignition response, power systems read as nominal, but the engine won't turn over." "And in the last 50 minutes, you've done what exactly?" "Full diagnostic sweep, twice. We've been through the ECU logs, the battery systems, the fuel delivery, checked every sensor reading we have access to remotely." He picked up his tablet and held it out, showing her a cascade of green indicators. "Everything reads fine. That's the problem. According to our systems, there's nothing wrong." Sophia stared at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at the car again. "Get me Reyes," she said. Carlos Reyes was the kind of race car driver who made you nervous just watching him walk. Not because he was dangerous, but because he moved with the absolute certainty of someone who had spent 15 years winning things and expected to keep doing so. He was 35, lean and compact, with a face that camera crews loved and mechanics respected, which was a rarer combination than people assumed. He was in the driver briefing room when Sophia found him, sitting backward on a chair with a coffee cup in his hands, talking to his race engineer about tire strategy. He looked up when she walked in and read her face in about 1 second. "How bad?" he asked. "The car won't start." He set down the coffee. "How long?" "We found it 45 minutes ago. Marcus has a full team on it." Reyes stood up slowly. "And?" "They haven't found anything yet. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something move behind his eyes. Not panic, not quite. More like the very controlled suppression of panic, which was arguably worse. "Sophia," he said carefully, "the race goes live in 4 hours and 20 minutes. I'm aware of that. And the spare chassis is 3/10 slower in qualifying trim and hasn't been race prepared. You know that." She kept her voice flat. "We're working the problem. I need you to stay here, stay calm, and let the engineers do their job." Reyes nodded once, the way professional people nod when they deeply disagree but understand the logic. "Okay," he said, "but I want updates every 15 minutes. "You'll have them." She walked back out into the corridor, and the moment the door closed behind her, she let out a breath that she'd been holding since Marcus said the word start. 4 hours and 20 minutes. That was how much time she had, in theory. By 8 o'clock, the theory was falling apart. The garage had transformed from its usual busy efficiency into something that resembled an emergency room, organized on the surface, but with an undercurrent of alarm that no amount of professionalism could entirely hide. Marcus had called in every resource available. 2 senior data engineers. The telemetry specialist from their UK base patched in remotely on a video call, his face floating in a tablet propped against a tool chest. A consultant from the engine manufacturer who'd flown in for the race and was now bent over a laptop with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely could not understand what they were seeing. There were 9 people actively working on the car's diagnostics. 3 more running parallel analysis on backup systems. The overhead screens showed cascading readouts from every sensor and module the RS-24 carried, and every single one of them was reporting nominal. Sophia stood at the back of the garage with her arms crossed, watching. She had learned something over 3 years of running this team. There is a specific kind of wrong that looks right on paper. Systems failures that hide behind clean data. Problems that exist in the physical world but don't show up in the digital one. She had seen it before. A wheel-bearing failure that passed every load test, a fuel line issue that the sensors never caught. In every case, someone had eventually looked at the actual car, not the data about the car, and found the thing everyone else missed. But right now, her engineers were staring at screens. "Marcus," she said, walking up beside him, "has anyone physically traced the primary power circuit? Not checked the sensor readings? Actually traced the wire path with their hands?" He looked up. "That's a lot of real estate to cover. The car's sealed to race configuration." "I know what configuration it's in. I'm asking if anyone has physically—" "We'd have to pull panels. That takes time. We might not." "Then pull panels." He held her gaze for a second, then nodded. "Okay, we'll start the physical inspection." It was 8:17 a.m. They had 3 hours and 23 minutes before the race. The call came from a man named Dennis Park. Dennis was 61 years old and had spent 37 of those years in and around motorsport in one capacity or another: chief mechanic, team manager, paddock contractor, and now a vaguely defined paddock consultant who showed up at races and offered advice that people sometimes took and sometimes didn't. He knew everyone. He remembered everything. And at 8:45 in the morning, he found himself standing outside Garage 7 with a coffee, watching the chaos through the open bay door with the calm expression of someone who'd seen catastrophe up close enough times that it no longer particularly rattled him. What rattled him was the solution he couldn't quite put his finger on. He'd been listening to the engineers talk through the symptoms for 10 minutes, the brief vibration before the failure, the clean diagnostics, the location of the issue somewhere in a system that couldn't quite be pinpointed. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a door had opened onto a memory he hadn't visited in a long time. Noah would know. The thought arrived without ceremony, just a simple, clear statement from the part of his brain that had cataloged 20 years of working alongside the best mechanical minds in the business. Noah would walk in here, ask 2 questions, and have this solved in an hour. Dennis stood with his coffee for another 30 seconds, arguing with himself. Then he took out his phone. The call reached Noah Carter at 8:52 a.m., while he was under the hood of a 2019 Honda CR-V that needed a new alternator. His phone buzzed on the workbench. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He pulled himself out from under the hood, wiped his hands on a rag that was already beyond help, and looked at the screen. Dennis Park. He hadn't spoken to Dennis in almost 2 years. He stared at the name for a moment, then answered. Dennis. Noah. You watching the race today? I'm working. Of course you are. A short pause. How's Lily? She's good. 8 now, getting too smart for her age. Despite himself, he almost smiled. Dennis, what do you need? I need you to listen to me for 30 seconds before you say no. Noah closed his eyes briefly. That's not a reassuring opening. Bennett Motorsport has a car down at Valcourt. Race car. Won't start, and nobody can figure out why. They've had 9 engineers on it for 3 hours. Clean diagnostics across the board, but the engine won't turn over. Race goes live in... A brief pause. 3 hours and 15 minutes. Call someone else. I'm calling you. Dennis? Noah. Dennis's voice dropped the casual tone entirely, and what was underneath it was serious and direct. I've been listening to these guys describe the symptoms. Before you say anything else, I need you to answer one question. You ready? Noah didn't say anything, which Dennis apparently took as a yes. When a Formula Class car shows clean power delivery readings across all sensor points but still won't fire the engine, and the driver reported a brief vibration immediately before the failure, where do you start looking? The silence that followed lasted almost 10 seconds. Grounding, Noah said quietly. Check the grounding circuit. Yeah, Dennis said. That's what I thought too. Another pause. Sophia Bennett is down here watching her season fall apart, and nobody in that garage is asking the right question. I think you know what the right question is. You've always known. Noah turned and leaned against the workbench. Through the open garage door, he could see Mrs. Patterson from next door walking her dog on the sidewalk. The ordinary, quiet morning going about its business. I'm not a racing engineer anymore, he said. You never stopped being one. I walked away from that world, Dennis. You know why. I know why, Dennis said, and I respect it. I'm not asking you to come back to anything. I'm asking you to drive 22 minutes and look at a car. One car. And if you see what I think you'll see, spend an hour fixing it. That's it. Then you go home. A brief pause. Lily's at school, right? Until 3. You're home by noon, I promise. Noah looked down at his hands, the Honda's oil still on his knuckles, the fluorescent light of the garage humming overhead, the same way it had been humming every morning for 4 years now. He thought about a different garage, brighter lights, the particular vibration of a V6 waking up at full throttle, the feeling, completely unlike anything else he'd ever experienced, of solving an impossible problem under pressure. He'd put all of that away, deliberately, carefully. Not because he hated it, he'd loved it, genuinely and deeply, but because he'd loved something else more, and you can't always have everything. 22 minutes, he said. 22 minutes. Noah exhaled slowly. Tell me exactly what the driver said about the vibration. He didn't change his clothes. That was the thing people would remember later, that he arrived at Circuit Valcourt in a worn navy work shirt with a small oil stain near the collar, carrying nothing but the canvas bag he kept in his truck for off-site jobs. His truck was a 2015 Ford F150 with a cracked side mirror and a pine tree air freshener that had stopped smelling like anything 2 years ago. He pulled into the paddock lot at 9:31 a.m. and had to show his ID to 3 different gate attendants before Dennis met him at the paddock entrance. You look exactly the same, Dennis said. You look older, Noah said. Yeah, well. Dennis clapped him once on the arm. Come on, the situation is colorful. That was an understatement. The scene inside Garage 7 was the kind of controlled chaos that looks like productivity from a distance, but starts revealing its own anxiety up close. 9 people at various stations, 3 screens showing live telemetry, a video call running on a tablet propped beside a tool chest, and the car itself, pristine, sealed, and completely non-functional, sitting in the middle of it all like a very expensive piece of modern art. Noah stopped in the doorway and looked at the car for a long moment without saying anything. A man with a team jacket and a tablet walked over. Marcus. Noah recognized the type immediately. Technically brilliant, currently overwhelmed, and deeply skeptical of whatever he was about to be presented with. "You're the guy Dennis called?" Marcus asked. It wasn't hostile exactly. It was the tone of a person who's polite under duress. "Noah Carter." He didn't extend his hand because both of his were currently occupied with his bag. "What are the symptoms?" "Everything reads clean. All power delivery sensors nominal. Battery at full charge. Fuel system pressure correct. ECU isn't showing any fault codes. Driver attempted ignition at 5:40 this morning and got nothing. No starter engagement. No response at all." "What's the driver say he felt before the failure?" Marcus blinked. "Sorry?" "Before the ignition attempt. The driver was in the car for the pre-race check. What did he say about the moments leading up to it?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, and looked slightly uncomfortable. "The driver said there was a brief vibration in the chassis when he first got in. We logged it as..." "What kind of vibration?" He described it as a thump, low frequency, single occurrence. "Where in the car did he specify?" "He said it felt like it came from the rear section. We reviewed it against the sensor data and..." "Your sensors didn't flag it," Noah said, not as a question. "No." Noah nodded slowly. "Okay. Can I see the car?" Sophia had been watching from the far end of the garage, and her first instinct, she would admit this to herself later in the privacy of her own thoughts, was dismissal. Not aggressive dismissal, just the quiet, honest kind that happens when you're under extraordinary pressure and someone walks into your space who doesn't look the part. The work shirt, the canvas bag, the complete absence of any badge or credential beyond the visitor's pass clipped to his collar. He looked like someone's uncle who fixes cars on weekends. Her team had 9-degreed engineers in that garage. 2 of them had postgraduate qualifications in vehicle dynamics. The consultant on the video call had 20 years in Formula Class engine development, and they hadn't found anything. She watched this man, this Noah Carter that Dennis had vouched for, stand beside the car and just look at it for about 45 seconds without touching anything, not consulting a screen, not pulling up data, just looking. His eyes moved slowly across the chassis, starting at the nose and working rearward, and there was something in the quality of his attention that made her stop what she was doing and watch more carefully. "The driver's still here?" Noah asked without looking up. "In the briefing room," Marcus said. "Can someone get him? I'd like to talk to him directly." Marcus glanced at Sophia. She gave him a small nod. While they waited, Noah crouched down beside the rear section of the car, still not touching it, looking at the underside through the gap between the floor and the sealed body panels. He tilted his head slightly, the way a person does when they're trying to hear something rather than see it. Carlos Reyes arrived in under 3 minutes, which told Sophia that he'd been hovering somewhere nearby waiting for any update. He came in fast and stopped when he saw Noah. "You're the mechanic?" "I'm a mechanic," Noah said, standing. "Carlos Reyes?" "Yeah." "Tell me about the vibration. Not the report version. Just tell me what it felt like." Reyes studied him for a second with the evaluating look of someone assessing whether a conversation is worth having. Then something in his face shifted slightly. Not quite trust, but the decision to try. "It was like something settling," he said. "Like a thunk. Not a rattle, not continuous. One single movement. I felt it through the seat." "How long before you attempted ignition?" "Maybe 30 seconds. I was going through my pre-start check, adjusted my harness, double-checked the steering column alignment, then I hit ignition, and nothing." "When you adjusted your harness," Noah said carefully, "you braced against anything in the cockpit? The seat structure? Door?" Reyes frowned. "I pushed off the sill a little, same as always." "Right side or left?" "Right." Noah was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Marcus. "Is there a way to open the access panel on the right rear quarter without removing the full body section? I'm thinking about the bracket assembly that runs parallel to the main harness trunk, behind the firewall extension." Marcus stared at him. Yeah, there's an inspection panel, but that section is..." "I know it's clean on the telemetry," Noah said. "I'm not asking about the telemetry. I'm asking if we can get eyes on the physical connection behind that bracket." A beat of silence in the garage. Someone's laptop chimed softly. The video call consultant said something to someone off screen. "Yeah," Marcus said slowly. "We can open that panel." "Then let's open it." It took 11 minutes to remove the access panel and get a fiber optic camera into the cavity behind the right rear quarter. Noah watched the feed on a monitor with Marcus beside him, and he said nothing at all while the camera worked its way through the tight space, around the bracket assembly, into the alcove behind the firewall extension. There. He saw it before Marcus did. He was certain of that, though he didn't say so. A grounding strap. The kind of connection that looks almost incidental in the larger architecture of a race car, but is in fact load-bearing in the most critical possible way. The strap connected the main power circuit to the chassis earth point, completing the electrical loop that allowed the engine's ignition system to function at all. The strap was seated in its connector. It looked connected. On every diagnostic that read its connection status, it was connected, or close enough that the sensor couldn't distinguish between fully engaged and the hairline gap that actually existed. But the connector housing showed microfracturing along the left seam. Something, and Noah was fairly sure he knew what, had applied a slight lateral force to the bracket assembly, causing an infinitesimal shift in the connector's position. Not enough to trip a fault code, enough to break continuity under load. When the car's power systems tried to route current through the ignition sequence, the ground wasn't actually completing. The engine never had a chance. "There," Noah said, pointing at the screen. Marcus leaned in. He stared for a long moment. That looks like it might be. Get me a multimeter and a proper grounding strap. This size connector." Noah pulled a notepad from his bag and wrote down the connector spec from memory. Gauge, terminal type, contact rating. He tore off the page and handed it to Marcus. "If you have that strap in your parts inventory, we can have this repaired in 15 minutes. Marcus took the paper, looked at it, looked at Noah, and then turned and said, sharply, and with a suddenly very different energy in his voice, "Jin, Carla, parts inventory now. This spec, pull everything you have in this size." Sophia came to stand beside Noah while the engineers pulled the inventory and prepped the workspace for the repair. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She was doing what she often did in high-pressure situations, which was process information before she spoke, because words said in crisis had a way of becoming permanent. "How did you find it that fast?" she asked. Noah glanced at her. Up close, she looked exactly like what she was. Someone carrying a very heavy thing with the determined intention of not letting it drop. There were shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with the morning's crisis and everything to do with the sustained weight of running an operation this size. "I stopped looking at the data," he said. "That's not a complete answer." He almost smiled. Almost. When your diagnostics all read clean but the car won't work, one of two things is true. Either the problem doesn't exist, which it clearly does, or the problem exists in a place your sensors can't see it. He looked back at the car. Sensors measure states. They don't measure transitions. The vibration Carlos felt was the connector shifting. That shift happened once, and then the connector settled into its new position, still close enough to fool the resistance check, but far enough to break actual continuity under ignition load. And you knew to ask about the vibration because nobody had asked yet. He said it simply, without any performance of superiority, just a statement of fact. I looked around the garage when I walked in. Everyone was at a screen. Nobody had talked to the driver about what he actually experienced in the moments before the failure. Physical reality and sensor data are two different things. This car is a physical object. Sometimes you have to start there. Sophia studied his face for a moment. "You've seen this before." "Similar. Not exact." He paused. "A grounding fault that escapes diagnostics. I worked on something like it maybe 12, 13 years ago. Different car, different circuit, different league, actually." "What league?" A brief pause. Something moved in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "Formula 2, he said. "Long time ago." He didn't offer more, and she didn't push. Not yet. The parts inventory came back positive. They had the connector, they had the strap, they had everything they needed. Noah picked up the grounding strap from the parts tray, looked at it once to confirm the spec, and said to Marcus, "Okay, let's get in there." What followed was not dramatic in the way that people who weren't mechanics might expect. There was no special technique. No moment where Noah did something that required exceptional skill. What it required was the particular kind of patience that comes from experience, the willingness to work in a confined space without rushing, to seat a connector correctly the first time, to not skip the verification step even when the clock on the wall read 10:44 and there were less than 90 minutes before race start. He worked in the access cavity with Marcus assisting, the fiber optic camera running live on the monitor so the whole garage could see. One engineer volunteered corrections twice. Noah listened, considered, and in one case adjusted his approach. He wasn't precious about it. Other people's eyes caught things. That was the job. At 10:52 a.m., he seated the new grounding strap, confirmed the mechanical lock, and checked continuity with the multimeter twice before he moved out of the access space. "Try ignition," he said to Marcus. Marcus looked at him for just a moment, that half second where a person decides whether they believe something before it's been proven, and then nodded to Reyes, who was standing at the cockpit. The driver dropped into the seat, reached for the ignition button. The garage had gone almost completely quiet. 9 engineers, 3 support staff, a paddock consultant, and a CEO. All of them holding their breath in one way or another. Reyes pressed the button. The engine turned over, caught, and fired with an instant, full-throated roar that rattled the tool chest against the far wall and blew heat off the floor in a visible wave. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Marcus said very quietly, "Oh, thank God." After that, everyone moved at once. Engineers checking readings, telemetry feeds updating, someone on the phone immediately relaying the news to the team principal's box. The noise level in the garage went from silence to near chaos in about 4 seconds, the kind of joyful, relieved chaos that only happens when a group of people collectively comes back from the edge of a very bad outcome. Sophia stood still in the middle of it. She was watching Noah. He was standing beside the car with his hands at his sides, looking at the instrument readouts through the open cockpit. Not smiling, exactly. The expression on his face was something quieter than satisfaction. The particular look of someone who has solved a problem and is already letting it go, because that's what you do. He reached into his bag, pulled out the original multimeter, placed it back in its case with the same care he'd used taking it out, and began repacking. He was, she realized, getting ready to leave. "Noah." He turned. Sophia walked toward him, and she was aware as she did it that the noise around them was continuing, that nobody was particularly paying attention to this specific moment, that it was just 2 people standing in a race garage while chaos churned around them. "Thank you," she said. "That's insufficient, but it's true." "You're welcome." "How—" She stopped herself, started over. "Before I let you go, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How long since you've been in a race garage?" He considered that. "About 4 years." "You didn't hesitate at all, on any of it." "Hesitating doesn't help." She looked at him with the same directness she'd been trained to see through people, but had never quite gotten rid of applying to people she was actually curious about. "Dennis told me you used to be in the sport, professionally." "Dennis talks. He says you were one of the best." Something shifted in Noah's face. Not discomfort exactly, more like the careful management of a thing that still had some weight to it. "Dennis is generous." "The skill I just watched you apply in there wasn't generosity," Sophia said. "That was exceptional. So what happened? Why are you fixing CRVs in a small garage instead of—" She gestured at the room around them. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive. It felt more like he was deciding how much of a true answer to give. "I have a daughter," he said. "Her name is Lily. She's 8. A pause. "Her mother passed away 4 years ago. Cancer. It went fast. We thought we had more time than we did." He said it plainly, not performing grief, just stating the geometry of what had happened. "I was in the middle of a season, flying around the world, gone 3 weekends out of 4. And suddenly I had a little girl who had just lost her mother, and she needed her father to actually be there. Not call from a hotel in Singapore. Not promise to make it home for the school play. Be there." He looked down briefly. "So I came home." Sophia said nothing for a moment. Around them, the garage continued its recovery. Readouts stabilizing, engineers briefing each other, someone laughing at something for the first time in hours. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Don't be. It was the right call. He said it without defensiveness or self-pity, which was somehow the thing that made it most affecting. She's... And here, for the first time, something genuinely warm moved through his expression. She's a good kid, smart, asks better questions than most adults I've known. She deserves a father who shows up. And you do. I try. He picked up his bag. Around him, the team was already moving the car back into race configuration, mechanics swarming, the choreography of a paddock preparing for battle. In 40 minutes, the warm-up would begin. In 80, the race. I should get out of your team's way, Noah said. You could stay, Sophia said. Watch the race. You've earned that easily. He looked toward the garage entrance. Through the bay door, she could see the grandstands across the circuit beginning to fill. Thousands of seats gradually becoming thousands of people. The slow-building energy of a race day crowd. Flags, cameras, the particular electricity that only existed at this scale. She saw him feel it. The memory of it, at least. His posture changed for just a second, almost imperceptibly, and then settled back. I've got a car to finish back at the shop, he said, and Lily gets picked up at 3. He looked at her one more time, and there was something in his expression that was completely genuine and also completely resolved, the look of a man who had made a choice he'd examined thoroughly enough to be at peace with. Good luck today, he said. He walked out of the garage and into the morning sun of Circuit Valcourt, carrying his canvas bag, in a worn navy shirt with a small oil stain near the collar, threading through the swelling crowd of a championship race day as though he were the most ordinary person in the world. Marcus Chen appeared at Sophia's shoulder. He's leaving? Yes. A pause. Who is he exactly? Sophia watched the figure disappear into the paddock crowd. I'm not entirely sure yet, she said, but I'm going to find out. She turned back to the garage. The RS-24's engine was running through its warm-up cycle now, everything reading exactly as it should, the car alive and ready and full of the potential energy of a race that 40 minutes ago had seemed impossible. Around her, the team moved with renewed purpose. The particular brand of focused electric energy that comes after a crisis survives. People who'd been hunched over laptops were now upright, speaking quickly, prepping for the battle ahead. Reyes was suited up and running through his mental prep, that private focused state that drivers slipped into before everything got loud. The crew chief was coordinating the pit lane setup. Someone was running the final tire selection conference at the far end of the garage. The whole magnificent, exhausting, terrifying machine of it grinding back to life. Sophia stood in the center of it and breathed. She pulled out her phone and typed a single note to herself. A name, and a question she intended to answer before the day was over. Noah Carter. Who was he? She pocketed the phone, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the pit wall. The race was in an hour. There was still a championship to win. The grandstands were full by 11. Not the polite kind of full, where people find their seats and settle in with programs and overpriced coffee and the ambient patience of a crowd that knows it has time. This was the compressed electric kind of full. 60,000 people pressed into a space designed for 55, standing in the aisles, leaning against the chain-link safety fencing, crammed along the pit wall viewing areas in numbers that made the circuit's safety coordinator visibly uncomfortable. Circuit Valcourt only got this kind of attendance twice a year, once at the season opener and once here at the penultimate round, when championships were still unsettled and every point on the board felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sophia felt the crowd before she saw it. The low, constant roar that 60,000 people generate without even trying. Conversations, movement, anticipation came through the concrete of the pit wall like a physical thing, a vibration you registered in your chest rather than your ears. She stood at the Bennett Motorsport pit station and watched the warm-up formation begin, and for a moment she let herself feel the full weight of what had almost happened. 3 hours ago, this race was over before it started. The car was dead, her team was scrambling, and the championship lead, 12 points, which in racing terms was the difference between commanding and fragile, was approximately 45 minutes from becoming meaningless. And then a man in a worn navy shirt had walked into her garage, asked one question that 9 engineers hadn't thought to ask, and put everything back together in under 30 minutes. She thought about what Marcus had said afterward when the garage chaos was settling. That's embarrassing, honestly. The solution was right there. Don't be embarrassed, she told him. Figure out why we missed it. That was the real question, and it was still sitting unresolved in the back of her mind while the warm-up laps began, and Car 7, alive, functional, breathing, moved through the circuit's first sector with the kind of clean telemetry that made engineers exhale. Her phone was in her hand. She'd been carrying it that way since Noah walked out, and she'd been doing something with it that she almost never allowed herself during race operations. She'd been distracted. She opened the note she'd made. Noah Carter. Who was he? She typed the name into a search field, then stopped herself. Not yet. The race was starting. Whatever Noah Carter was or had been, it would keep for 2 more hours. She pocketed the phone and turned her full attention to the pit wall. But the question stayed with her. She had learned in 3 years running this team that the questions that stay with you during moments when you can't afford distraction are usually the ones worth paying attention to. Carlos Reyes brought the car around for the final formation lap at exactly 11:58 a.m., and Sophia watched him thread through the Sector 3 chicane with the particular precision of a driver who is running on something beyond skill. The hot, focused, slightly angry energy of a man who had spent the entire morning believing his race was gone and was now absolutely determined to make the people who doubted that pay for it. She'd seen that look in drivers before. It was, in her experience, both valuable and occasionally dangerous. Marcus, she said into her headset, tell Carlos to keep it clean in the early laps. He's running hot. Copy that, Marcus said. Though, for the record, running hot has worked for him before. Running hot has also gotten him 2 contact penalties in the last 4 races. A brief pause. I'll pass it along. The lights went red at the end of the pit lane. 60,000 people fell, as they always did in that suspended moment before a race start, into a silence that was never actually silent. Too many bodies, too much held breath, but was as close as that many humans in a single place ever got. Then the lights went out and the season continued. The first lap was clean. The second was where it got complicated. Reyes started from 5th, the car's grid position, earned in qualifying 2 days earlier on a setup that was now 4/10 slower than the race trim. Coming out of the opening chicane on lap 2, he found a gap between the 3rd and 4th place cars that was, technically speaking, approximately a car width and a half. He put his car into it anyway. The contact was minor. A tap on the left rear of the car ahead, enough to cause a small moment of oversteer for the other driver and a collective sharp intake of breath from the Bennett pit wall. Nothing that required a safety car, nothing that would result in a penalty, as it turned out, but the kind of thing that made Sophia grip the pit wall with both hands for about 2 seconds. Reyes, stay disciplined, Marcus said over the radio, the word disciplined carrying about 4 layers of meaning. We have pace, we don't need to force it. Reyes's response on the radio was a single word that was probably understood, though the connection briefly crackled at exactly the wrong moment. Did he say understood? Sophia asked. Marcus kept his eyes on the timing screen. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. By lap 8, Reyes was in 3rd. By lap 14, 2nd. The car was behaving exactly as the engineering team had designed it to behave in race conditions. The grounding fix had apparently resolved a secondary symptom they hadn't even identified yet, a minor instability in the traction control handoff that the driver had been complaining about mildly for 2 races. With the ground circuit fully functional, the ECU was communicating with the engine management system at the speed it was supposed to, and the result was a car that felt, according to Reyes's radio transmissions, actually alive for the first time all weekend. Sophia heard that and thought about a mechanic in a work shirt walking out of her garage without looking back. She made herself focus on the timing screens. But the thought kept returning, the way important things do when you're trying to hold them at a distance. Not the dramatic part of what Noah had done, though that was genuinely remarkable. The other part, the thing he'd said standing in the garage while chaos reorganized itself around them. I have a daughter. Her name is Lily. And the way he'd said it, not as an explanation or an excuse, as a simple statement of the most important fact in his life. She had met a lot of people in this industry who talked about sacrifice, who spoke with great feeling about the things they'd given up for the sport, the personal costs, the family time traded for race weekends, the relationships that hadn't survived the schedule. Most of them, if she was honest, said it in a way that was slightly proud, like the sacrifice was evidence of their commitment, and commitment was the point. Noah hadn't sounded proud. He'd sounded matter-of-fact. He'd made a choice. He'd stand behind it, and none of it required any particular acknowledgement. She wasn't sure she'd ever met anyone in professional motorsport who talked about their priorities that way. She was still thinking about it when Marcus touched her arm and said, "Sophia, lap 19." She looked at the screens. Lap 19 was where the race broke open. The leader, a driver for a German team running on a different tire strategy, had pitted under the lap 18 safety car period, which most teams hadn't predicted. Reyes was now, on paper, leading the race. The question was whether Bennett Motorsport would respond by pitting immediately to cover the undercut or hold position and play the long game on fresher rubber. "Options," Sophia said. Marcus had the data already. He'd been running the scenarios since lap 15, which was why she paid him what she paid him. "If we pit now, we come out in second behind Hartman. He's on a 2-stop strategy, and we knew that going in. If we stay out, we hold the lead on track for approximately 6 more laps before the tire delta becomes unmanageable, and then we pit into a gap that puts us either first or second, depending on traffic." Hartman's pace on those tires? Slower than we expected. Whatever adjustment they made in the pits added rear stability, but cost him turn-in speed. His Sector 2 is down 3/10 on what he was doing in qualifying. Sophia looked at the live timing. 3/10. In a 59-lap race, 3/10 per sector adds up to something significant. "Hold position," she said. "Tell Carlos to push Sector 2. We're staying out." Marcus raised his eyebrows about 2 millimeters, which was his version of visible surprise. "That's aggressive." "Noah fixed a grounding fault in 20 minutes when my entire engineering team couldn't find it in 3 hours," she said. "I'm in an aggressive mood." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. "Copy that," he said into the headset. "Carlos, we're staying out. Push Sector 2. Hold what you've got." There was a pause from the driver's side, then, "Tell me we have the pace to back this up." "We have the pace," Marcus said. "Then let's go." The next 6 laps were the kind of racing that gets shown in highlight packages. Reyes drove Sector 2 on each of those laps with the controlled aggression of someone who trusted his machinery completely, which he now did, which was not the case 48 hours earlier when he'd spent a lengthy debrief session complaining about the traction control inconsistency. The car was responding to him the way a good race car should, transparently, predictably, with enough feedback that he could push to the edge of its limits without guessing where those limits were. The pit stop came on lap 25, clean and fast. 2.4 seconds, a number that made the tire crew punch each other on the shoulders in the way tire crews do when something goes exactly right. Reyes rejoined in second, 4.7 seconds behind the lead car, with 34 laps to make it up. In the stands, 60,000 people who had no idea how close this race had come to not existing at all were having the time of their lives. In the Bennett Motorsport pit garage, Sophia's phone was buzzing. She ignored it through the lap 30 safety car, through the restart, through the extraordinary lap 37 where Reyes closed the gap from 4 seconds to 1.8 with a sequence of sector 2 times that had Marcus openly muttering calculations under his breath. She ignored it through the near miss at turn 7 on lap 41, where Reyes and the leader went side by side through a sweeping right-hander at the kind of closing speed that makes even experienced pit wall observers look away. She checked it at lap 45, during a brief strategic discussion that didn't require her full attention. 3 messages from different people, plus a news alert. She dismissed the news alert without reading it and opened the first message. It was from her head of PR, a woman named Diane, who had been with the team for 6 years and had the institutional knowledge of someone who remembered everything that had ever happened to the organization. Sophia, journalist from Motorsport Weekly, is asking questions about the man who helped with the car this morning. A few people in the paddock apparently saw him arrive and recognized him. You'll want to know who he is before this becomes a story. The second message was from Dennis Park. I should have mentioned before, Noah's history in the sport is a bit of a known thing among people who've been around long enough. Just a heads up that you may start getting questions. The third message was also from Dennis, sent 11 minutes after the first. Call me when you get a chance. Not urgent, just there's context you should have. Sophia read all three messages. She put the phone away. She looked at the timing screens where Reyes was now 1.2 seconds behind the lead car with 14 laps remaining. The race needed her attention. It would get it. But when this was over, she was going to call Dennis Park, and she was going to find out exactly who Noah Carter had been before he became the man in the worn Navy shirt who fixed her car and left without asking for anything. The answer she suspected was going to be more complicated than she was prepared for. She was right. Noah, at that specific moment, was 40 minutes north of Circuit Valcourt, sitting in his garage with the radio on. He hadn't planned to listen. He'd come back intending to finish the Honda. The alternator was still half installed. The owner was picking it up tomorrow morning, and Noah had the particular professional ethic of someone who believes that a job started is a job that gets finished, regardless of what happens in between. He'd set up his portable speaker on the workbench, told himself it was just background noise, and gotten back under the hood. For about 6 minutes, he'd successfully convinced himself that he wasn't really listening. The commentator's voice was the one that had been calling races on this particular network for 12 years, a man with a particular gift for making the silence before an overtake feel like the pause before something inevitable. Noah had listened to that voice on countless race days, during a period of his life that felt, at this distance, like it had happened to someone else. Or maybe more accurately, like it had happened to an earlier version of himself who had the same hands and the same instincts, but was carrying a completely different set of things. Reyes is pushing hard into Sector 2, and the gap is coming down. We're at 1.4 seconds now, 12 laps remaining, and the Bennett Motorsport car looks absolutely on a different level today compared to the first half of this weekend. Noah's hand stopped moving. He listened. Then he picked up his wrench and kept working, but the radio stayed on and he stopped pretending he wasn't paying attention. He remembered this. He remembered it exactly. The specific quality of tension in a race that's still genuinely open, where anything can happen, and the outcome hasn't yet decided to resolve itself. He'd experienced it from inside garages, from pit walls, from the headset side of driver radio conversations. He'd been the person running the numbers on strategy calls, the person tracing a fault under pressure, the person who sometimes made the difference between a car that finished and a car that didn't. He'd been good at it. He knew that without false modesty, the same way he knew his hands were steady and his spatial reasoning was above average. It was just true. He was also good at fixing alternators and at packing a school lunch that his daughter would actually eat, and at reading the same 3 chapters of a particular book about a girl who discovers a secret garden over and over again at bedtime without letting his voice show the places where the story made him think of his wife. Different kinds of good. All of them real. The wrench turned. The Honda's alternator settled into place. He checked the mounting torque, ran his fingers along the belt tension, and began reconnecting the electrical leads in the order you always do them, ground last. And Reyes makes his move, going deep into the braking zone right down the inside. This is extraordinary. This is absolutely extraordinary driving. And the gap at the moment of contact, there's contact. There's contact at turn 4 and Reyes is through. Reyes has the lead. With 11 laps to go, Carlos Reyes and Bennett Motorsport have the lead of this Grand Prix. Noah set down the wrench. He stood still for a moment, listening to the crowd noise coming through the radio speaker. 60,000 people making a sound like something ancient and enormous. And he felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years, which was the particular, specific pride of someone who contributed to a result that they can't publicly claim. It wasn't regret. He was clear enough about his own interior life to know the difference between regret and acknowledgement. He wasn't sorry he'd left. He wasn't wishing he were standing on a pit wall right now. But he had put his hands on that car. His eyes had found that connector. His question had given the driver back something the driver needed. Not just a functional ignition system, but the confidence that comes from a car that responds the way it should. That traction control handoff that had been nagging at Reyes for 2 races, suddenly behaving the way it was supposed to. Small things. The kind that compound. He picked the wrench back up and finished the job. At 1:47 p.m., the radio announced that Carlos Reyes had crossed the finish line in first place, and that Bennett Motorsport had extended their championship lead to 19 points with one race remaining. Noah heard it while he was running the Honda's engine to check for vibration, so the sound of the radio was partially lost in the engine noise, but he caught the important part. He shut off the engine. The garage was quiet. Outside, the street was ordinary. A dog barking somewhere, a truck going past on the main road, the sound of Mrs. Patterson's lawn sprinkler starting up next door. The particular small sounds of a life he had built in a specific way, for specific reasons. He cleaned his tools. He labeled the Honda's key and hung it on the board. He washed his hands twice, the second time with the pumice soap that actually got the oil out, and thought about what to make for dinner. Lily liked pasta. They had everything for it. He could do the sauce from scratch. It took 40 minutes, but she preferred it that way. And Tuesday was the kind of day where 40 minutes of doing something ordinary with his hands while she sat at the kitchen island and told him about school felt like exactly the right speed for the world. His phone rang at 2:03 p.m. He looked at the screen. A number he didn't recognize, with a country code that matched the circuit's region. He let it ring through to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text arrived from the same number. Mr. Carter, this is Sophia Bennett. I'd like to speak with you if you're willing. Not about today. Well, partly about today. Partly about something else. Please call when you have a moment. He stared at the message for a moment. Then another text, arriving fast, like she'd typed it immediately after sending the first. Dennis gave me your number. I hope that's okay. And then a third, even faster. I'm sorry for the multiple messages. I tend to overcommunicate when I'm uncertain about something. Noah read the three texts twice. Despite himself, he found that last one almost funny. A woman who runs an $18 million racing operation apparently sends 3 rapid-fire texts when she's not sure how something will land. That was, in its way, oddly relatable. He thought about not calling back. It would be simple enough. He could put the phone in his pocket, go pick up Lily, make the pasta, and let the day close on the quiet note it had already been building toward. He'd done his part. The car worked. The race was won. Whatever Sophia Bennett wanted to discuss was her business. But Dennis had given her his number. Dennis didn't do things carelessly. And there was something in those 3 texts, particularly the third one, that had the quality of a person being honest rather than strategic, which was rarer than it should be. He called back at 2:11 p.m., standing in his garage with his back against the workbench and the afternoon light coming through the bay door at the low angle it got in late spring, painting everything gold. She picked up on the second ring. Mr. Carter? Noah, he said. Congratulations on the race. Thank you. We wouldn't have had one to win without you. A pause. How's the alternator? He blinked. Sorry? You said you had a car to finish. A Honda, I think you mentioned. CRV, yeah, it's done. Good. There was noise behind her. She was still at the circuit, he could tell. Crowd, PA system in the background, the particular ambient frequency of a race paddock. I wanted to thank you properly. I don't think I did that well when you left. You did fine. I said thank you. That's insufficient, but it's true. I've been replaying it, and it sounds like something a lawyer says at a deposition. He laughed. It came out before he decided to, which was in itself a small surprise. It was honest, he said. I don't mind honest. Good, because I have some things I want to say that are honest, and I'm not sure how you'll take them. Another pause, shorter. I did some research on you this afternoon, between stints. Marcus ran strategy, so I had gaps. Here it was. Okay, he said. You were Carter Engineering, Sophia said. Formula 2 team, 2013 to 2017. You and a partner named... He heard paper, or a screen, something rustling. Evan Marsh. You built the operation from scratch in 18 months and won the constructor's title in 2016. Your car won 9 races that season. 9. A brief silence. Then in 2017, the team dissolved. You left the sport. I can't find a record of where you went or what you did next, except that you apparently moved about 60 miles north of Valcourt and opened a small garage. He was quiet. I'm not prying, she said, and then, with the self-awareness of someone who's realized how that lands, I am absolutely prying. But I want you to know that it comes from a genuine place, which is, she paused. What you did today isn't just impressive. It's the kind of thing that makes me want to understand the person who did it. Noah looked out the bay door at the afternoon, the street, the ordinary life of it. The team dissolved because Evan and I had different ideas about the direction we wanted to go, he said. We'd had the discussion before. After 2016, it became a real disagreement. We parted ways. A pause. And then my wife got sick, and the direction question stopped mattering. I'm sorry. People keep saying that. Does it get old? Sometimes. He said it honestly, not when it's meant. A brief silence. The circuit noise behind her continued its background hum, the sound of a world he'd walked away from, carrying on regardless, which was what worlds did. I want to offer you something, Sophia said, and I want to be clear that you're not obligated to take it, and I won't take it personally if you don't, because I understand. She paused again. Well, I understand more now than I did this morning. What's the offer? A consulting contract, flexible terms. You set the hours, you set when you're available. We're not asking you to travel, not asking you to come back into the full operation. What I'm asking for is access to your head when we have a problem that our conventional diagnostic approach isn't solving. She let that sit for a moment. Because what happened today, that's happened before. Not the specific fault, but the pattern. A car that reads clean but behaves wrong. Engineers who are brilliant at reading data but sometimes lose the habit of asking the most basic question. I need someone who still thinks physically. Noah said nothing for a moment. Lily picks up at 3, he said. I know. I'm not asking for your answer now. I'm asking you to think about it. He thought about it. He stood in the bay door of his garage with the afternoon sun behind him and thought about it more thoroughly than he would have admitted to anyone, because the honest truth was that the morning had unlocked something in him that he'd been keeping carefully stored, not locked away. He'd never been dishonest enough with himself to pretend the instincts weren't there, just stored, put on a shelf in a room he didn't visit, because visiting it didn't serve anything. This morning, he'd taken it down from the shelf, and it had still fit exactly right. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. One question, he said, sure. The engineers this morning, they're good people. Marcus is good. I could see that in the first 30 seconds. He chose his words carefully. If I take this, it's not about replacing what they do. It's about a different set of eyes on a specific kind of problem. That's exactly what it is, Sophia said. That's exactly how I'd frame it to the team. Okay? A pause. I'll call you. Thank you, Noah. He ended the call. He stood for a moment in the doorway with the phone in his hand. Then he pocketed it, went inside, and grabbed his truck keys. It was 2:19. Lily got out at 2:55. If he left now, he'd get there right as the bell rang, which was her preferred version of pickup. She liked to walk out and find him already there, leaning against the truck in a way that she'd decided, at age 6, was how dads are supposed to stand. He'd asked her once what that meant. Like you already knew I was coming, she'd said. He'd thought about that answer more times than he could count. He drove north through the ordinary afternoon, windows down, the radio on a station that played old country music that his wife had liked and he'd inherited the habit of. He thought about the race and the grounding connection and the look on Marcus's face when the engine fired. He thought about Sophia Bennett's voice on the phone, the way it had the same quality in both modes, the professional one and the uncertain one, direct, a little too fast, genuinely trying. He thought about Evan Marsh, which he didn't often let himself do. The disagreement that ended their partnership had been the kind that two people can both be right about from their own positions, which is the worst kind because it doesn't resolve into anything clean. Evan had wanted to move the operation up to Formula One level. Noah had wanted to keep it where it was, keep it theirs, keep it at the scale where they could still know every bolt on every car. They'd talked it through for 6 months and arrived finally at the conclusion that they both believed the right thing deeply enough that neither of them could follow the other. He didn't regret the choice, but he thought about Evan sometimes and wondered if the Formula One team had ever won anything. The school came into view around the curve of Maple Street. He pulled into the pickup lane and got out of the truck and leaned against it the way he always did, easy on the front quarter panel, arms loosely crossed, facing the main door. The way Lily had decided was correct. The bell rang at 2:54. Children poured out the front doors in the particular joyful chaos of kids released from captivity, and Noah scanned the crowd with the automatic attention of a parent looking for a specific face in a sea of small faces. He found her. Brown jacket, hair half escaping from a ponytail that had apparently been in better shape this morning, backpack slightly too large for her frame in the way it always was, because Lily Carter refused to accept that the backpack was too big and she was going to grow into it if it took until middle school. She spotted him and broke into a run, which she always did, which was something he never tried to take for granted because he was aware that at some point she would stop doing it. 8 years old was not old, but it was not permanent either. She hit him at speed and he caught her, backpack and all, and she said into his shoulder, "Dad, Marcus said the car went and you were there?" Marcus from next door said his dad texted him a thing. Marcus from next door's dad was at the race. "Yeah." He set her down. "I went to look at a car." "A race car?" "A formula car." Her eyes went wide. "A real one? Like a real race car?" "A real one." "Did it go?" She was using the word in the way she always did. Go, meaning did it work, did it run, did it do the thing it was supposed to do? "Eventually," he said, and opened the truck door for her. "Yeah, it went." She climbed in and started wrestling with her backpack, shoving it into the footwell with the particular determination of a small person who will not accept help. He went around to the driver's side and got in. "Dad," she said, still fighting the backpack, "can we have pasta tonight?" "Already planning on it." "With the good sauce?" "Is there another kind?" She finally got the backpack situated and looked up at him with the expression of someone who has resolved a significant problem. "I want to hear about the race car," she said. "At dinner, the whole thing." He looked at her, the half-escaped ponytail, the missing front tooth she'd lost 3 weeks ago that was very slowly growing back, the absolute certainty in her face that the story would be worth hearing. "Okay," he said. "At dinner." He pulled out of the school lot and headed home, and the afternoon closed around them the way good afternoons do. Without ceremony, without announcement. Just the ordinary light of a day ending, and the particular warmth of a truck carrying 2 people who are exactly where they're supposed to be. On the radio, low enough that Lily was already talking over it, the race results were still being discussed. 19-point lead. 1 race remaining. A championship that had come back from the dead this morning was now looking, for the first time all season, genuinely achievable. None of the commentary mentioned a mechanic in a Navy work shirt. Noah hadn't expected it to. He drove home. Lily talked about her day. A conflict with a friend about something that was clearly important. A test she thought she'd done well on. A bird that had gotten into the gymnasium and caused 30 minutes of wonderful chaos during PE. He listened to all of it with his full attention, asking the questions that kept it going, because listening to his daughter talk about her life was something he had decided 4 years ago was not something he would do halfway. At home, he started the pasta sauce. At 4:30, his phone buzzed once. Dennis Park. "Heard you talk to her. Good. Whatever you decide, you did good today, Noah. That's all." He left the message unanswered and stirred the sauce, and Lily sat at the kitchen island with her homework, and outside the window the light was going that particular late-day gold that made everything in the small house look like it was lit from within. It wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed repainting. The homework Lily was doing had a section she was going to struggle with, and he could already see her brow furrowing in the preliminary way that preceded the announcement that homework was unfair. The sauce needed another 20 minutes, and he'd slightly over-seasoned it and would have to correct. None of it was smooth, none of it was uncomplicated. But it was real, and it was his, and he had built it with his own hands, and it held. The call from Motorsport Weekly came to Sophia's office on Wednesday morning, 3 days after the race. She'd been expecting it. Diane had warned her Tuesday afternoon that the journalist, a man named Paul Garrett, who'd been covering the sport for 20 years and had a reputation for finding the threads people preferred to leave unpulled, had been making inquiries through the paddock. A photographer working the pit lane had caught Noah on a long lens leaving Garage 7. The image was grainy, taken at a distance, but enough people in the paddock had recognized him that it had circulated through the usual channels, and now Garrett wanted comment. Sophia took the call herself. She didn't hand it to Diane. "Ms. Bennett," Garrett said, with the particular pleasantness of a journalist who has already decided what the story is and is calling to fill in specifics. "Thank you for your time. I'll be direct. We have photographs and several paddock witnesses who confirm that Noah Carter was in your garage Saturday morning prior to the race. I want to give you the opportunity to comment before we publish." "What exactly are you publishing?" she asked. "A piece about Carter's return to paddock life, his history with Carter Engineering, his departure from the sport, and the role he apparently played in getting Car 7 running before the race." A brief pause. "It's a good story, Ms. Bennett. Former championship builder, left the sport under unclear circumstances, shows up 4 years later and saves a race in under an hour. Our readers will want to know that story." Sophia turned her chair to face the window. The Bennett Motorsport facility spread out below her office, the main workshop where the build crews were already prepping for the final round, the engineering wing where Marcus and his team were deep in post-race analysis, the small courtyard where 2 mechanics were eating lunch on a bench in the November cold. Her operation, her people, the thing she'd spent 3 years making hers rather than just her father's inheritance. "You said unclear circumstances," she said. "What unclear circumstances?" "Carter Engineering dissolved after the 2017 season," Garrett said. "Championship winning team, no announced reason for the closure, both principals simply stopped appearing at races. Carter disappeared entirely. Marsh went to work for a manufacturer program. Neither of them has ever publicly explained what happened." Another pause. "In this sport, when a successful team closes without explanation, people have theories." "What kind of theories?" "The usual kind," Garrett said carefully. "Financial irregularities, a falling out, conduct that couldn't survive scrutiny, none of which I'm asserting as fact, which is why I'm calling you." Sophia was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about a man standing in her garage with his hands at his sides, looking at a car he'd just fixed, with no particular interest in credit or recognition. She was thinking about 3 texts sent in quick succession, the professional one, the honest one, and then the third one that said, "I tend to overcommunicate when I'm uncertain about something," which was either the most calculated or least calculated thing a person could say, and she decided it was the latter. "Mr. Garrett," she said, "I don't have a comment on Noah Carter's personal history because it's not mine to comment on. What I can tell you is that he came to our garage at the request of a mutual acquaintance. He identified a fault that our team had missed, and he fixed it. He was professional and generous with his time, and he left without asking for anything." She paused. "If you want the story of what happened Saturday morning, that's the story. The rest is speculation, and I'd encourage you to be careful with it. Can you put me in contact with Carter directly?" "No." "Would you be willing to, no?" she said again, pleasantly and finally. "Thank you for calling, Mr. Garrett." She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and spent the next 20 minutes doing something she'd been putting off since Saturday afternoon. Not the basic search she'd done during the race, which had confirmed the public record of Carter Engineering, but a thorough one. The kind you do when you actually want to understand something rather than just confirm what you already know. The public record was straightforward up to a point. Noah Carter, born 1992 in a mid-sized city 2 hours from Valcourt. Engineering degree from a technical university. Started in motorsport as a junior mechanic at 18, moved through 3 teams in 6 years, developing a reputation as the kind of person who fixed things that other people couldn't fix, and who did it without a lot of noise about it. Met Evan Marsh in 2011 at a Formula 3 team where they were both working. Formed Carter Engineering in 2013. Won the Formula 2 Constructors title in 2016 in what multiple period sources called one of the more impressively executed technical operations the series had seen. A small team that consistently outdiagnosed and outstrategized opponents with 3 times the budget. Then 2017. And then nothing. She found an interview from 2016 given to a trade publication after the championship, where Noah had been quoted speaking about diagnostic philosophy. She read it twice. The quote that stayed with her was this: "The most dangerous assumption in engineering is that the sensors are telling you everything. Sensors tell you what they're measuring. That's a different thing. You always have to go back to the physical object and ask what it's actually doing versus what the system thinks it's doing." He'd been 33 when he said that. He'd been running a championship-winning team, and 3 years later he was fixing ordinary cars in a small garage and raising his daughter alone. And if you only had the second half of that story, you'd never guess the first. She found the dissolving notice for Carter Engineering, filed in early 2018. No statement, no press release, no interview, just the administrative record of a company ceasing to exist. She found one other thing, buried in the results: a small local newspaper item from 2019, the kind that ran in the human interest section between a piece about a school fundraiser and an ad for a car dealership. The headline was, "Local Mechanic Opens Shop on Maple Street." There was a photo. Noah, younger looking than he'd been on Saturday, standing in front of what was clearly an earlier, less established version of the garage she now knew he ran. The item was 3 paragraphs. It described him as a former automotive professional who had returned to the area to be closer to family. It mentioned his daughter's name. It did not mention Carter Engineering or Formula 2 or any championship. She wondered if he'd asked them to leave it out. She thought probably he had. She closed her laptop. The thing she kept returning to, the thing she couldn't put into a strategic framework or a business rationale, which was how she generally processed information, was the image of him crouching beside the car, looking at it. Not at the screen above it, or the tablet beside it, or the laptop 3 feet away running diagnostics. At the physical object itself, with the patient, almost meditative attention of someone who had learned, somewhere along the way, that the answer lived in the thing and not in the data about the thing. She'd been in this sport for 3 years as CEO, and however many years before that as her father's daughter, absorbing it through proximity. And she could count on one hand the number of engineers she'd met who still looked at the car the way mechanics look at a car, with their whole body, with touch and sound and the slow accumulation of physical attention. Most of her engineers were brilliant. Most of them had forgotten how to do that. She picked up her phone and called Dennis Park. He answered immediately, which suggested he'd been expecting the call. "I heard Garrett sniffing around," he said, before she'd said anything. "You heard fast." "I hear everything fast. It's my only remaining superpower." A pause. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing useful." "What happened in 2017, Dennis?" A short silence. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like the silence of someone deciding how much of a complicated thing to summarize. "What do you know already?" he asked. "Public record. The team dissolved. No explanation. Both of them left." "Did you find anything about Sarah?" She paused. "His wife?" "Yeah. I found the local paper piece from 2019. It mentioned he had a daughter. It didn't mention his wife specifically." Dennis was quiet for a moment. "Sarah Carter was diagnosed in early 2017, he said. March, I think. Noah told me later it came out of nowhere, and she was healthy, no warning signs, and then a routine thing flagged something, and within 6 weeks they had a diagnosis and a timeline." Another pause. "She was 31. Sophia said nothing. "He didn't tell anyone in the sport right away," Dennis continued. "He kept running the team. But you have to understand what it takes to run a team at that level. You're talking 100% of your waking attention, minimum. Travel every other week, the engineering, the personnel, the strategy, the sponsor relationships. He was carrying all of it." A pause. "And then he was trying to be there, for Sarah, for the little girl. Lily was 4. How long did Sarah have?" 8 months from diagnosis. She passed that November." A brief silence. "He called me a week after the funeral. He said he was closing the team. I asked if he was sure. He said he'd been sure since March. He'd just needed to get through the season." Dennis paused. Evan Marsh, his partner, didn't know about Sarah until August. Noah hadn't told him, and when Evan found out, he felt blindsided. He'd been making plans for 2018, talking to sponsors, building a roadmap for moving the operation up, and none of it was ever going to happen, and Noah had known that for 5 months. That's why the partnership dissolved. There was a conversation. I don't know everything that was said. I only know Noah's version, and I only know bits of that. But yes, it ended things between them. Another pause. I don't think either of them was wrong exactly. Evan had a right to know. Noah was surviving something unsurvivable and doing it the only way he could figure out how to do it. Those two things can both be true. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Through her office window, she could see Marcus crossing the courtyard below with a coffee in each hand, heading toward the engineering wing. He was moving fast. He always moved fast, Marcus, even when nothing required speed, a habit of urgency that she recognized because she had it too. He never came back, she said. After everything settled, he never came back to the sport. He chose not to, Dennis said. I talked to him about it once, maybe 2 years after he opened the garage. He wasn't bitter about it. He wasn't hiding from anything. He'd made a decision about what mattered, and the decision held up. A pause. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't leaving. The hardest part was that he didn't miss it as much as he'd expected to. Sophia thought about that. Because Lily was enough. He didn't say it that way. He said, let me think. He said the work he was doing felt complete in a way the racing work hadn't. That fixing a regular person's car, knowing they depended on it to get to work and pick up their kids, had a different kind of weight to it. A real weight. The kind that meant something outside the sport. A pause. I don't know. He was in a strange place that day. I didn't push it. Dennis, Sophia said carefully, he told me he'd think about the consulting offer. I know, he mentioned it. Do you think he'll take it? Another silence. The longer kind. I think Saturday morning reminded him of something he'd been careful not to remind himself of, Dennis said finally. Whether that's a reason to say yes or a reason to stay clear, I genuinely don't know. That's his call to make. A brief pause. What I do know is that if he says yes, you'll be lucky. And if he says no, you should respect it completely. I know that. I know you know it. I'm saying it anyway. His voice shifted slightly, less careful, more direct. He's a good man, Sophia, the real kind. They're harder to find than you'd think, in this sport. She thanked him and ended the call and sat for a long moment at her desk, looking at nothing in particular. Then she pulled up the consulting contract template her legal team used for outside specialists and started making notes in the margin. She wasn't assuming he'd say yes. She was preparing for the possibility, because preparation was how she operated, and because if he did say yes, she wanted the terms to be right. Genuinely right, in a way that reflected what she now understood about what this man had given up and what he'd chosen instead. The work kept her at her desk until after 6. Noah called on Thursday. He'd spent 2 days not deciding, which was its own kind of decision-making, letting the question sit in a corner of his mind while he lived the ordinary rhythm of the week, watching to see what it did there. He'd finished 3 jobs at the garage, attended a parent-teacher conference where Lily's teacher told him she was reading 2 grades ahead, but had a tendency to argue with the established answer when she thought she had a better one, and cooked 4 dinners, one of which had been a disaster involving overcooked rice that Lily had diplomatically described as interesting. He'd also, on Wednesday evening, found himself pulling up an old laptop he kept in the closet, the one that still had his engineering software on it from the Carter engineering days. He hadn't opened it to work on anything. He'd just opened it, looked at the interface for a while, and closed it again. That told him something. He called Sophia at 9 a.m. from the garage before his first job arrived. I have conditions, he said after she picked up. Tell me. I'm not traveling. Whatever I do from here, or from Valcourt, if it's local, but I don't go on the road with the team. Agreed. My daughter's schedule is non-negotiable. School events, pickups, anything she needs, that takes priority every time, no exceptions. That's in the contract already, Sophia said. I had legal put it in Tuesday. He paused. You wrote the contract before I called. I wrote the terms before you called. I didn't assume the answer. A brief pause. Though, yes, I had the terms ready, I don't like being unprepared. I'm not a full-time consultant. I'm not on retainer in the traditional sense. You call me when you have a specific problem that your team hasn't been able to solve, and I'll tell you whether I can help with it. Some things I won't be able to help with. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That's all I'm asking. And I'm not going to be put on the website, he said. No press releases, no announcement. I'd rather... Done. He was quiet for a moment. You're agreeing to everything very fast. I had a lot of time to think about what was fair, she said. I got to the same place you did on most of it. A pause. There's one more thing. Okay. The engineers, he said. Marcus and his team. Whatever I do is complementary, not competitive. I'm not there to show them up or replace their approach. If I take a problem and solve it, the solution belongs to the team. I don't take credit. I don't want credit. I want to be clear about that dynamic from the start. There was a pause on Sophia's end that felt different from the others. Slightly longer, slightly more weighted. That's generous, she said. It's practical, he said. If the engineers feel like I'm there to make them look bad, they'll resist my input and the whole thing stops working. I've been on the other side of that dynamic and it helps nobody. Fair point. A pause. Noah, can I ask you something? Sure. Why, yes. I mean, why now? What changed between Saturday and today? He considered how honest to be. He decided on fully honest because he'd already established that as the operating mode of this particular relationship, and there wasn't much reason to deviate. I opened my old laptop on Wednesday night, he said. Just looked at it, didn't do anything with it, but I knew what it meant that I'd opened it. A pause. I've been careful these last few years not to put myself in situations that would pull me back toward the sport. Deliberately careful. And Saturday, that wasn't careful. That was Dennis calling at the right moment when I didn't have enough reason to say no. He paused. But I said yes. And after I walked out of that garage, I felt, I don't have a cleaner word for it. I felt useful in a specific way. Not just useful. Useful in the right direction. The right direction, Sophia repeated. Lily is the center of it. That doesn't change. But I think I'd been treating that as a reason to not use other parts of what I am, and I'm not sure that's actually necessary. He paused. She's 8. She'll be 18 in 10 years. I have to make sure she has what she needs. I'm not backing away from that, but I can probably do that and also do this, if the terms are right. The terms are right, Sophia said quietly. Then okay, he said. Send me the contract. The contract arrived within the hour. He read it at lunch sitting on the tailgate of his truck in the garage lot, eating a sandwich and reading legal language with the focused attention of someone who had once run a company and learned, the hard way, that contracts said what they said rather than what you assumed they said. The terms were genuinely right. Flexible hours. A clause written in plain language rather than legalese, specifying that family obligations took absolute priority and that no expectation of availability would override it. A fee structure that was fair without being theatrical about it. And a clause he hadn't expected. A confidentiality provision that ran both ways, protecting not just Bennett Motorsports' technical information, but also Noah's personal history and his involvement with the team from any external disclosure without his consent. She'd put that in before he'd asked for it. He signed the contract and sent it back. The first real test came 11 days later. The final race of the season was at Circuit Altamira, a track Noah knew well. He'd worked there twice during the Carter engineering years, and the layout had a particular characteristic in Sector 3, a long sweeping left that loaded the right rear tire in a way that few other circuits replicated, putting specific demands on suspension geometry and tire management that teams sometimes underestimated going into race week. Bennett Motorsport was at Altamira. Noah was at his garage on Maple Street, but Marcus had sent him the telemetry package from the first practice session, along with a note that said, "We have an odd platform instability through Sector 3. The data is clean, no single metric is out of range, but the driver says the car is moving in a way that doesn't match what we're predicting." Any thoughts? Noah had read the message at 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, between jobs. He'd told Marcus he'd look at it that evening. He looked at it at 8:45 after Lily was in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with his old laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside him. The telemetry package was dense, logged data from 47 sensor channels across 23 laps, formatted in the system Bennett Motorsport used, which was slightly different from what he'd used at Carter Engineering, but close enough that the differences were obvious within 10 minutes. He worked through it carefully. Not fast. The temptation when you're looking at a large dataset is to jump to the anomaly, to search for the outlier that explains everything. He'd learned over many years to resist that. You started at the beginning and went through in sequence, and sometimes the thing that explained everything wasn't an outlier at all. It was a pattern that was only visible if you'd seen everything that came before it. He found it on lap 16. It wasn't in the suspension data where Marcus had been looking. It was in the interaction between the ride height data and the differential temperature readings through the Sector 3 sequence, a compounding effect where a specific combination of road surface temperature, differential load, and ride height at the entry to the corner was creating a momentary loss of rear mechanical grip that the car's active systems were then compensating for in a way that felt, to the driver, like instability. Because it was instability. It was just instability generated by the system's attempt to solve a different problem. The fix wasn't simple, but it was specific. He wrote it out in plain language, worked through the geometry adjustments required, and checked his numbers twice before he sent anything. Then he typed Marcus a message. Sector 3, instability is a compounding effect. It's not in the suspension geometry independently. Look at the interaction between ride height at T3 entry and differential temperature management. The active compensation is creating the sensation your driver is feeling. Adjustments to ride height and cooling flow rate should break the compound. Numbers attached. Let me know if anything doesn't make sense. He sent it at 11:14 p.m. He went to bed. Marcus responded at 6:50 the next morning. We looked at this with fresh eyes overnight. You're right, running the simulation now, this is it. How did you see the differential temperature piece? I went through that data 3 times and didn't flag it. Noah typed back. You were looking at differential temperature as an independent variable. It doesn't do anything unusual on its own. It only becomes significant in combination with the specific ride height range at that corner entry. If you're not looking for the interaction, the individual readings all pass. A pause. Then Marcus again. That's the same logic as the grounding fault. Noah thought about that for a second, then typed, pretty much. Sensors tell you what they're measuring. They don't automatically tell you how the measurements relate to each other. Marcus sent a thumbs up emoji, which wasn't the most sophisticated response but felt genuine. Then, the team is running the adjustment in P2. I'll send you the data after. Thank you. Noah pocketed his phone and went to wake Lily up for school. The adjustment worked. Marcus sent the P2 data that afternoon with a single-line note. Sector 3 is clean. Driver says the car feels balanced. Qualifying is tomorrow. And then, a minute later, nobody on the team knows this came from you. Your name isn't in the session notes. Just wanted you to know we're honoring that. Noah read that message in the school pickup lane waiting for Lily and felt something settle in his chest that he didn't have a precise name for. Not pride exactly. Satisfaction, maybe, but of a specific and quiet kind. The satisfaction of having done something well and cleanly without leaving a mess. Carlos Reyes qualified on the front row for the Altamira finale. Sophia called Noah that evening, not about the telemetry, just to say that she'd heard from Marcus and that she was glad the arrangement was working. Marcus figured it out fast once he knew where to look, Noah said. That's the thing. The team is good. They just needed the right starting question. You keep saying that, Sophia said. The right question. It's what I keep seeing, he said simply. You have smart people who are very well trained in a specific method. The method is good, but methods have blind spots. Everybody's does. And your method doesn't have blind spots? My method has completely different blind spots, he said, which is why I'm not replacing your engineers. I'm giving you a different angle. That's all. A brief silence. How's Lily? He hadn't expected the shift, and it showed in the half-second pause before he answered. She's good. She beat me at chess last night, the first time she's done it without me making a deliberate mistake. How did that feel? Honestly? He considered. Really good. Like something worked. Sophia laughed. A real one. not a polite one. It was the first time he'd heard her actually laugh, and it had the quality of someone who doesn't do it as often as they probably should. "I know that feeling," she said. "Not the chess, but the something you put a lot of work into suddenly working the way it was supposed to." "Yeah," he said. "That's the one." They talked for 11 more minutes. He didn't track the time. He noticed it afterward when the call ended and he looked at the screen. 11 minutes about nothing in particular, the race weekend logistics, a question she had about the Sector 3 fix that she'd been turning over, something about the team's preparation that she was uncertain about. Easy conversation, the kind that moves fast because both people are actually interested. After he hung up, he stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in his hand. He was aware, in a general way, that something about this arrangement was becoming more complicated than a straightforward consulting relationship. He wasn't sure what to do with that awareness. He filed it somewhere, not ignored, not examined, just held, and went to check on Lily. She was at the kitchen table with her chess set, rearranging pieces and talking to herself about what she was doing, which was a habit she'd had since she was 5 and which he found, every time without exception, completely wonderful. "Dad," she said without looking up, "I'm working on a thing." "Take your time," he said, and put the kettle on. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the kind of late autumn cold that made everything sharp and specific. Through the kitchen window, he could see a section of sky with a few stars visible, and the bare branches of the maple tree at the edge of the yard, moving slightly in a wind he couldn't feel from inside. On Saturday, at Circuit Altamira, Carlos Reyes would line up on the front row of the grid with a car that was now, finally, balanced correctly through Sector 3. 60,000 people would fill the grandstands. Cameras would broadcast to somewhere between 20 and 30 million viewers worldwide. And at some point in the middle of all of it, on a street called Maple Street 40 minutes north of the circuit, a man would be in his garage with the radio on, half listening, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing with his morning. That was how he wanted it. He made the tea. Lily moved a knight across the board and announced to nobody in particular that she was building a trap, which was a new phrase she'd clearly picked up somewhere and was extremely pleased with. "Good strategy," he said. She looked up. "Do you want to play?" He put the tea down and pulled out the chair across from her. "Sure," he said, "but I'm not losing on purpose this time." She grinned. The big, missing tooth grin that still caught him off guard every time. The pure, uncalculated joy of an 8-year-old who has just been told the game is real. "I know," she said. "That's the point." Carlos Reyes won the championship at Circuit Altamira by 4 points. It wasn't clean. Nothing about the final race was clean. It was the kind of race that gets described in highlight packages as dramatic, and in engineering debriefs as a series of compounding variables we will need to address before next season. There was a safety car on lap 31 that scrambled the tire strategy for every team in the field. There was a brief rain shower in Sector 2 during laps 44 through 47 that made the track surface unpredictable in exactly the corner where Bennett Motorsports' setup was most sensitive. And there was a moment on lap 53, with 7 laps remaining and Reyes running second, where the championship leader made a mistake going into the final hairpin and put 2 wheels on the grass, and Reyes went through on the inside with the controlled precision of a driver who had been waiting 3 laps for exactly that gap. He crossed the line first. The gap to second place was 1.8 seconds. The gap to the championship, the points margin that made it all official, was 4, which, in a sport where seasons are decided by fractions and tenths, and the accumulated weight of 47 decisions made correctly across a 12-race calendar, felt both enormous and terrifyingly small. Sophia watched the finish from the pit wall at Circuit Altamira with her arms at her sides and her face doing something complicated that the cameras caught and replayed approximately 600 times over the following week. It wasn't celebration exactly, or it was, but it was mixed with something else. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding tension for so long that its release isn't pure joy, but rather a kind of total body relief that looks, from the outside, almost like grief. Marcus hugged her from behind and she let him, which told him more about how much this meant than anything she could have said. Reyes brought the car around on the cool-down lap, and she could hear him on the radio. Not the professional driver voice, the other one, the one that came out when the filter dropped. saying things that were probably not suitable for broadcast but were completely appropriate to the moment. The radio operator was laughing too hard to ask him to keep it clean. The podium ceremony was everything it was supposed to be. The trophy, the champagne, the national anthem. 60,000 people making the kind of sound that only happens when a season's worth of accumulated anxiety resolves itself in a single moment. Reyes stood on the top step with his fist raised, and the cameras found the Bennett Motorsport pit wall, and Sophia was there with her team around her. And it was that, she would say later, in a dozen different interviews, everything she'd worked for. What she didn't say in any of those interviews, because it wasn't the kind of thing you said in interviews, was that the first person she thought about when the checkered flag fell wasn't Reyes or Marcus or her father, whose name was on the building back home. It was a man 40 minutes away, probably in his garage, probably with the radio on, probably pretending to himself that he wasn't listening. She called him 20 minutes after the podium ceremony, standing in the garage with champagne still in her hair and the noise of the team's celebration audible behind her. He answered on the third ring. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you." She moved toward the back of the garage, where it was slightly quieter. "Were you listening?" "The radio was on." She smiled at the wall. "The Sector 3 fix held through the rain." "I heard. Reyes managed the tire temperature well, better than I'd expected given the conditions." "He had a balanced car to work with." She paused. "Noah, I want to say something, and I want you to actually hear it and not deflect." A brief pause. "Okay." "The championship started at Valcourt. Literally, not metaphorically. If Car 7 doesn't start that morning, we don't win today. The points we took from that race are the margin we won by. 4 points." She let that sit for a second. "You gave us 4 points." The line was quiet for a moment. Background noise on his end. Yes, the radio. She could hear it faintly. "The team raced for those 4 points," he said, "with a car that you made functional." "I found a loose ground connection," he said, and there was something in his voice, but not dismissive, more like he genuinely believed what he was saying. "That's not Noah." She said it with enough directness that he stopped. "You found in 20 minutes what 9 engineers couldn't find in 3 hours. And then 11 days later, you identified a compounding variable in 47 channels of telemetry that Marcus and 2 of his senior engineers missed across 3 separate reviews. Those 2 things together, in a season that was decided by 4 points, are not small." A pause. "I need you to let me say thank you properly without you reducing it to a grounding strap." Another silence. Longer. "Okay," he said quietly. "You're welcome." "Was Lily listening with you?" "She fell asleep about 20 laps in. She made it further than last time." There was something in his voice when he said it, warm and rueful in equal parts, the specific tone of a parent watching a child fight sleep and lose. She had very strong opinions about the lap 31 safety car, and then that was apparently her last strong opinion of the evening. "Smart kid," Sophia said. "She really is a pause. "She's been asking about you, actually." That surprised her. "About me?" "She knows I've been consulting for a racing team. I didn't give her details, but she's perceptive. She asked if the person who runs the team was nice." He paused. "I told her yes." Sophia stood with the phone against her ear and the champagne-damp jacket and the noise of her celebrating team filling the garage, and felt something move through her that she didn't immediately classify. What did she say to that? She said, "Good, because nice is harder than people think." He paused. Then she went back to her book. "She's 8. The subject changed." "She sounds like someone who says things that stay with you." "Constantly," he said, and she could hear that he meant it without any performance of parental sentiment, just fact. "Go celebrate with your team, Sophia. You earned this." "I will," she said. "Noah, the contract runs through the end of the calendar year. I want to talk about extending it when you're ready. On your terms." "I know," he said. "I'll think about it." She ended the call and stood for a moment in the relative quiet of the garage corner. Then she walked back into the noise and the champagne and the people, and she let the celebration be real, because it was real and it was hers. and some things you shouldn't qualify. The story broke the following Tuesday. Paul Garrett published it in Motorsport Weekly under the headline, "The Engineer Who Came Back, Noah Carter, and the Fix That Saved Bennett Motorsports Championship." It was, Sophia had to admit when she read it, well written, careful with the things that could be verified, appropriately hedged on the things that couldn't. Garrett had found the old photograph from the paddock camera, cleaned it up to something recognizable, and paired it with archival images from the Carter engineering years. He'd gotten quotes from 3 paddock regulars who'd recognized Noah that morning. He'd quoted the 2016 interview. He hadn't found anything about Sarah, which told Sophia that Garrett was actually being responsible, rather than just strategic. The piece described Noah as the quiet architect behind Bennett Motorsports' most critical race of the season, and speculated, with reasonable accuracy, that his involvement extended beyond that single morning. It did not have a quote from Noah. It did not have a quote from Sophia. It cited multiple paddock sources and drew its conclusions from the public record and those sources' observations. By Wednesday afternoon, it had been picked up by 6 major sports outlets. By Thursday morning, Noah's phone was ringing with numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't answer any of them. He put his phone on silent, did his morning jobs, picked up Lily from school, and made dinner. At 7:15, after Lily was settled with homework, he texted Sophia, "I assume you've seen the article." Her response came in under 2 minutes. "Yes. I'm sorry, I had no control over it. I gave Garrett nothing, and the confidentiality clause in our contract covers disclosure by us, not by third-party witnesses. I have legal looking at what options exist, but honestly, the story is out there now." A pause. Then, "How are you doing with it?" He thought about that question for a moment. He was standing in the kitchen with his phone, and through the doorway he could see Lily at the kitchen table with her homework spread in front of her, chewing on a pencil eraser in the way she did when she was thinking. The image had the quality of ordinary life, unremarkable and completely specific, the kind of moment that doesn't survive in memory unless you're paying attention. He typed back, "I'm okay. It's inconvenient, not catastrophic. I just don't want to talk to journalists." "You don't have to. I can have Diane issue a statement on the team's behalf that acknowledges your involvement, but makes clear you're private and not available for comment. That sometimes takes the heat off. Do that. Thank you. Done. Noah, one more thing." A pause. "The calls you're getting might not all be journalists. A few teams have reached out to me directly since the article published. They want to know if you're available for consulting work." He stared at that for a moment. "Other teams?" 3, so far. One of them is significant. I want to be transparent with you about it, rather than pretend it isn't happening." Another brief pause. "You don't work exclusively for Bennett Motorsport. The contract doesn't require that. How you handle outside interest is entirely your decision." He sat down at the kitchen table across from Lily, who looked up from her homework and then back down again, accustomed to her father existing in the same space without always requiring conversation. He thought about what Sophia had just said. He thought about the fact that she'd told him directly when she didn't have to, when she could have simply not mentioned it and let him navigate the incoming calls without context. He thought about what that said about the kind of person she was. "I'll think about it," he typed. "Thank you for telling me." He pocketed the phone. Lily was still chewing the eraser. "Everything okay?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah," he said. "Just people wanting things." "Did you say no?" "Not yet." She looked up then. She had his eyes, people said. The same specific gray-green that was hard to describe and easy to recognize. "Is it the racing team thing?" He told her more than he'd initially planned to over the past weeks. Not everything. She was 8, and some of the context required a framework she didn't have yet. But the broad shape of it, that he'd helped fix a car, that the team had won their championship, that he was still helping sometimes when they needed it. She'd listened carefully, the way she listened to everything, and asked exactly 2 questions. The first was whether he liked it. The second was whether it made him sad. He'd had to think about both answers. "It's connected to it," he said. "Other teams want to talk." "Are you going to talk to them?" "I don't know yet." She considered this with the seriousness that she applied to things she found actually interesting. "Dad," she said, "do you know what the difference is between a good question and a bad question?" He looked at her. "What?" "Miss," Renner said, "a good question is one where you don't already know the answer. A bad question is one where you already know the answer, but you ask it anyway because you want someone to agree with you." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you already know what you want to do?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Because if you do," she said, "then it's not actually a question." She went back to her homework. Noah sat across from her and said nothing for a moment, because he was doing the thing parents sometimes do, where a child says something that fits precisely into a shape in your thinking that you hadn't known was there. He did, he realized, already know what he wanted to do about the other teams. He'd known it approximately 40 seconds after reading Sophia's text. He just hadn't fully admitted it to himself yet. What he wanted was to finish the season, to honor the terms of the contract he'd signed, to be useful in the specific and contained way he'd agreed to be useful, and to see whether the thing he was building with Bennett Motorsport had the right foundation for whatever it became next. He wasn't interested in spreading the same energy across 3 different teams. He wasn't interested in becoming in any form the person he'd been before, even a quieter, more bounded version of that person. He wanted one thing done well. He'd always been better that way. He texted Sophia back at 8:47 after Lily was in bed. "I'm not interested in the other teams. I want to be clear about that, not because of the contract terms, but because it's not what I'm looking for. If you want to extend the arrangement after the new year, let's talk about that. Just Bennett Motorsport." Her response came 12 minutes later, which he suspected meant she'd read it immediately and made herself wait before responding. "I was hoping you'd say that. Call me when you're ready to talk terms." He put the phone down and didn't pick it up again until morning. The meeting happened in person on a Wednesday in early December at the Bennett Motorsport facility. The first time Noah had been there rather than at Valcourt. Sophia had suggested it. She wanted to show him the operation, she said, not for any strategic reason, but because she thought it would be useful for him to see the full context of what his work fed into. He'd agreed, arranged for Lily to go to a friend's after school, and driven the 45 minutes to the facility in the mid-morning. The building was larger than he'd expected. 3 main workshops, an engineering wing, a driver fitness center, an operations floor that hummed with the organized energy of a team deep in off-season preparation. People moved with purpose through the corridors. Mechanics, engineers, logistics personnel, a group in the design department who were clustered around a screen discussing something with the focused intensity of people whose work nobody outside the room would understand, but everybody would eventually sit in. Sophia met him in the lobby and walked him through it herself. She didn't delegate that to Diane or to Marcus. She did it herself. And she talked about the operation the way people talk about things they've built, with knowledge and with pride, but also with the specific honesty of someone who knows exactly where the cracks are. "The engineering wing is Marcus's kingdom," she said, as they passed through the glass-walled corridor overlooking the analysis floor. "He runs it well. He's added 2 people this year. You'll see the impact in Q1 next season, I think. But he and I have been talking about the diagnostic methodology since Valcourt, about what your approach showed us that we'd been missing." "What did he say?" "He was resistant at first." She said it plainly, not protecting Marcus from the description. I think he felt like it was a criticism of his methods, even though I tried to frame it differently. It took a few weeks." She paused. "But he came around. He's been incorporating physical-first protocols into the diagnostic sequence, starting with the actual car before moving to the data." She glanced at Noah. "He did it on his own. I didn't push it. He just started doing it after Altamira." "That's good," Noah said. "That's better than good." "I thought you'd say that." They ended up in her office. Large windows, a view of the main workshop floor, walls that had the organized density of someone who works in the space rather than performs in it. Race programs, technical documents, a whiteboard covered in notes that she'd half erased and then added to, and then apparently decided to leave as is. A coffee machine that looked like it had been through significant use. She made 2 coffees without asking how he took his, which meant she'd either remembered from a conversation he didn't recall having, or she'd made an assumption. He noticed she'd gotten it right. They sat on opposite sides of the desk, and for the first 2 minutes they talked about the consulting contract extension, term, scope, a small fee adjustment she'd included that he hadn't asked for, but when she explained her reasoning, was difficult to argue with. Then she closed the folder and set it aside. "I want to ask you something that's outside the contract," she said. He looked at her. "Okay." "Dennis mentioned a while back that in the Carter engineering years, you'd started developing a diagnostic training program, something you were going to bring in-house to work with your junior engineers." She paused. "He said it was almost ready when the team closed." Noah was quiet for a moment. That was a piece of the past he hadn't expected to surface. "He mentioned that?" "He said it was the best thing you'd built, that it was specifically designed to teach engineers how to think physically about mechanical problems, how to stay connected to the actual object rather than the model of it." She paused. "He said you'd never finished it." "It was about 70% complete," Noah said. When things changed, it went on the shelf with everything else." "Is it still there? On the shelf?" He looked at her for a moment. He was thinking about the laptop in the closet, about the document files that sat in a folder he hadn't opened in 4 years, labeled with a name he'd given the program when he was 33 and running a championship team, and believed, with the certainty of someone who hasn't yet been tested by the particular things that were coming, that there was enough time for everything. "In a manner of speaking," he said. "I'm not asking you to rush it," Sophia said carefully, "and I'm not asking for it on behalf of the team. Not primarily. I'm asking because I think it exists, and I think it's probably still good, and I think the fact that it's sitting unfinished in a folder somewhere is a small waste." She paused. "I have 3 junior engineers in the development program who are bright and technically skilled, and have exactly the blind spot you identified in the senior team. They learn fast, and they don't have 15 years of habits to unlearn." Noah looked at the whiteboard on her wall, the half-erased notes, the accumulated evidence of a person's working mind. "That would take more time than the diagnostic consulting," he said. "I know. It would need to be built back out. What I had was incomplete. I know that too. And it would need to be tested against real problems, not simulations, actual fault scenarios on actual cars." "I have actual cars," she said. "I have a whole building full of them." He looked at her. She had the expression of someone who had made an argument she believed in and was now waiting without performing patience, genuinely waiting, without the theatrical neutrality people sometimes put on when they want to appear open-minded. It was the same expression, he realized, that Lily got when she'd set a chess trap and was watching to see whether he'd see it. He thought about the folder on the laptop. He thought about the 70% that was already done, the framework that he'd built across 2 years of watching brilliant engineers make the same category of mistake over and over, looking at the model instead of the object, trusting the data instead of the thing the data was supposed to represent. He thought about how he'd written it because he'd believed it would matter, and then events had made the believing irrelevant, and the work had stopped. He thought about Lily saying, "If you already know the answer, then it's not actually a question." "It would take time to scope properly," he said. "I can't give you a timeline right now." "I'm not asking for one." "And Lily still comes first. If the schedule creates conflict—" "It won't," Sophia said. "I'll make sure of it." He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without flinching, which was one of the things he'd noticed about her. She didn't look away from things, even things that were uncomfortable. She met them directly and worked with what was actually there rather than what she wished was there. It was a quality he recognized from the best engineers he'd known, applied to an entirely different domain. "Okay," he said. "Let me look at what I have. I'll tell you what it would take to finish it." Something moved through her expression. Not triumph, nothing that performed, just a kind of quiet resolution, like something that had been holding tension finally finding its place. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. It might be worse than I remember." "Or better," she said. He almost smiled. "Or better," he allowed. They finished the coffee. She walked him back through the facility, and this time he saw it differently. Not as a tour, but as context, the physical shape of the problem she was asking him to work on. The development engineers she'd mentioned were in the analysis room when they passed. 3 young people in team jackets bent over laptops with the concentrated energy of people early enough in their careers to still be hungry without yet being tired. He watched them through the glass for a moment. The one on the left, a woman, mid-20s, with her hair pushed back with a pencil in the way that suggested the pencil had migrated there unconsciously and been forgotten, was doing exactly what Marcus had been doing at Valcourt that morning in November. Screen open, data running, eyes on the display rather than on the physical object 3 feet to her left. Noah watched her for a moment. He thought about the program, the 70% that was done, the 30% that he'd known needed to be built but hadn't gotten to. He thought about what the 30% would need to look like and found, with some surprise, that he already knew, that the shape of it had been sitting in his head all along, waiting for a reason. He looked at Sophia. "The one with the pencil in her hair," he said quietly. "What's her background?" Sophia looked. "Jin Yara, mechanical engineering degree, top of her program. She's been with us 8 months. Marcus says she's the best problem reader he's seen at her level in years." A pause. "But she gets stuck on the data the same way he used to." "Yeah," Noah said. "I can see that." They stood at the glass for a moment longer, watching the development team work. "The program," Noah said. "When I have a sense of the scope, I'll call you." "I'll be here," Sophia said. He drove home in the early afternoon, through the December cold with the heater running and the radio on the old country station. Lily wouldn't be home until 5. He had the afternoon, the quiet, unstructured kind of afternoon that he'd learned over 4 years to use well. He went home. He made coffee. He went to the closet and took out the laptop. He sat at the kitchen table with it for a moment before opening it. Outside, the maple tree in the yard was bare now, the last of November's leaves gone, the branches making their specific patterns against a white-gray sky, the kind of sky that made the afternoon feel like it existed in its own time, separate from the morning and the evening. He opened the laptop. He found the folder, the program file. He opened it, and the first thing that came up was a note he'd written to himself at the top of the document in 2017 when he was still in the middle of building it. "The thing we're teaching isn't a technique. It's a habit of returning to the physical world. Data is the map. The car is the territory. The territory always wins." He read it twice. Then he opened a new document beside it and started writing. He worked for 2 hours without stopping, which was how he'd always worked when something was right. Not in the careful, rationed way of someone who isn't sure, but with the specific momentum of a person who has found the thread and is following it, because that's what you do when you find a thread. The 30% that had been missing turned out to be close to 35%. And some of the 70% he'd thought was done needed reworking. But the framework held. The core logic held. The territory always wins. Start there. At 4:45, he saved the document, closed the laptop, and went to start dinner before Lily got home. Pasta again. She'd requested it specifically, which at this point felt less like a food preference and more like a standing household policy. At 4:58, his phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, he picked it up. "Hey," Marcus said. "I know it's late in the day. Quick question." "Sure." "We're running a postseason fault analysis. By going through every race this year and categorizing the failure modes, I'm looking at something from the Melbourne race back in March. Intermittent brake bias shift. Driver reported it. We logged it as driver error at the time." A pause. "Now, I'm looking at the actual telemetry, and I think we missed something. I was wondering, when you have a minute, not urgent, if I could send you the file." Noah looked at the pot on the stove. Lily was home in 12 minutes. "Send it," he said. "I'll look tonight." "Thanks." A pause. "How are you?" "Outside of this?" It was an unexpected question from Marcus, who generally kept things professional. Noah considered it. "Good," he said. "Busy in the right way." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I know what that feels like." A brief pause. "For what it's worth, and you didn't hear this from me because I'm not a sentimental person, I told Sophia back in November that whatever she was paying you wasn't enough." Noah said nothing for a moment. "What did she say?" "She said she knew, and she was working on it." He could hear a smile in Marcus's voice, slight and slightly reluctant, the kind a serious person allows when they're caught being human. Anyway, I'll send the file. I'll look tonight. He hung up and stirred the sauce. It needed another 10 minutes. He was slightly under on the salt this time, which was the opposite problem from last week, and he added a pinch and stirred again. The garage program was open on the laptop in the other room. The Melbourne telemetry would arrive in his inbox in the next few minutes. Lily was 13 minutes from the door. The pasta water was heating. None of it was separate from any other part of it. That was the thing he'd been figuring out, slowly, across the months since a phone call from Dennis Park on a quiet Tuesday morning had walked him back into a world he'd thought he'd left behind for good. It wasn't that the racing and the garage and Lily and the dinners and the program on the laptop all fit together in some tidy way. They didn't. Some days the timing was wrong, and some days he was tired, and some days Lily needed something that required him to let everything else wait. And he let it wait without resentment because that was the deal he'd made with himself and it still held. But they weren't separate. That was the thing. They were all expressions of the same thing. A person who was good at finding the answer hidden in the physical world, who had learned that the physical world included an 8-year-old who argued with established answers, and a kitchen on Maple Street and a program for training engineers to look at the actual car instead of the map of the car. The sauce was ready. He turned down the heat, dried his hands, and heard the front door open. "Dad, I have a project," Lily announced, dropping her backpack in the hallway with a thud that he'd stopped asking her not to do because the battle wasn't worth the energy. "It's a big one. Ms. Renner says I have to build a model of something that moves and explain how it works." He put the pasta in the water. "What kind of something?" She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her coat, her hair in a state that suggested the afternoon had been eventful. "I was thinking a car," she said. "Can you help me with a car?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I can help you with a car." She grinned, the missing tooth grin, the pure, unguarded one, and disappeared back into the hallway to deal with the backpack situation, which she would approach with the same determined independence she applied to all logistical challenges. He stirred the pasta. The kitchen filled with steam and the smell of the sauce, and outside the maple tree stood bare against the December sky, and somewhere 45 minutes south of Maple Street, a racing team was preparing for a new season with a car that would, when the time came, have a proper set of eyes on it. He was those eyes. He was also the man stirring the pasta. Both were true. Both had always been true. He just hadn't figured out how to hold them at the same time until now. The program had a name now. Noah had resisted naming it for 2 months, on the grounds that naming something before it was finished was the kind of optimism that tended to backfire. But in late January, sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night, with Lily long asleep and the document open on the laptop beside a cold cup of coffee, he'd written the title at the top of the first page almost without deciding to. Physical. First, a diagnostic framework for mechanical problem solving. It wasn't elegant. He'd considered making it more, he didn't know, more titled. Something that sounded like it belonged on a conference program. But every time he tried a different version, it came out sounding like something designed to impress rather than describe. And the whole point of the thing was the opposite of that. Physical first. That was the idea. Everything else followed from it. He sent the completed draft to Sophia on a Thursday morning in February, with a short note that said, "This is the full version. It's longer than I expected. Let me know what you think before we discuss next steps." She called him that evening at 8:30. "I read it," she said. "All of it?" "I started at 6. A pause. "Noah, I don't have the technical vocabulary to evaluate the engineering specifics, but I've given it to Marcus and I've read the framework sections myself, and what you've built here is..." She stopped. Started again. "The section on interaction variables. The part about how individual sensor readings become misleading precisely because they're correct, each one accurate in isolation, but together creating a false picture. I've been in this sport for 3 years and nobody has ever explained that to me in a way I actually understood until tonight. It's easier to explain than to train," he said. "That's the challenge. The concept is simple. The habit of applying it under pressure, when you have 9 engineers in a race in 4 hours, that's what takes work. That's what the second half is, Sophia said. The training sequences, the scenario exercises. They need to be run on real hardware. Simulations only take you so far. He paused. I've been thinking about how to structure the practical sessions. If you're willing to give the development team access to a spare chassis for half-day exercises, I can build the scenarios around actual fault conditions. Things I've seen in the field, recreate them on a controlled car, let the engineers work through them without knowing what the answer is. Marcus will love that, she said. He's been asking about hands-on diagnostic training for 2 years. Budget was always the obstacle. This doesn't need much budget. It needs time and a willingness to be wrong in front of colleagues, which is harder. He paused. That's the part I'll need you to establish from the top, the culture piece. If the engineers feel like being wrong during training is a performance assessment, they'll protect themselves rather than learn. I need them to be willing to fail on purpose. A brief silence. I can do that, Sophia said. I'll make it explicit. Training errors are expected, not penalized. And Marcus needs to be in the room, Noah said. Not supervising, participating, same as everyone else. Another pause. He could feel her working through the implications of that, asking her chief engineer to sit beside his junior team and work through problems he might get wrong in front of them. It was not a small ask. I'll talk to him, she said. Don't sell it to him, Noah said. Just tell him what it is and let him decide. If he decides against it, the program doesn't work anyway. She was quiet for a moment, then, You've thought about this a lot. I've been thinking about it since December, he said. Since I watched Jin Yara stare at a screen with a physical object 3 feet away from her. She's been asking about you, Sophia said. Jin. After the Altamira analysis, but when Marcus started incorporating the physical protocols, she figured out that the change came from somewhere external. She doesn't know the details, but she's perceptive. She'll be perceptive enough to be the hardest one to train, Noah said. The smart ones always are. They have more invested in their current method. Is that why you put the section on intellectual resistance in the second chapter? It's why that section is 12 pages, he said. Sophia laughed. The real kind again, the one that came out before she decided to allow it. He'd been cataloging, without intending to, the small ways she was different from the version of herself that had looked at him across a chaotic garage in November, with the careful, evaluating eye of someone who couldn't yet decide what to make of him. She was still direct, still fast, still carried the particular weight of someone responsible for a lot of things. But there were edges she'd stopped performing. The professional neutrality she'd worn like a second jacket in those early conversations had loosened over the months. Not because the professionalism had gone anywhere, but because it no longer needed the reinforcement. He noticed it. He'd been noticing it for a while. He also noticed, with the honest self-awareness of someone who'd been examining his own interior life by necessity for 4 years, that he looked forward to her calls in a way that was distinct from the way he felt about other professional contacts. That the 11 minutes after the Altamira race had stayed in his memory with more detail than it probably warranted. That when Lily had asked if the person who ran the team was nice, his answer had been immediate and unqualified in a way that a purely professional assessment might not have been. He'd filed that awareness in the same careful place he'd filed the rest of it, and he'd kept working because working was what was real, and the rest of it was something he didn't know what to do with yet. Marcus agreed to participate in the training. He told Sophia he'd think about it for 24 hours and then called her back in 11 minutes and said yes. She relayed this to Noah with the observation that Marcus's thinking periods consistently ran shorter than advertised, which Noah found reassuring. The first session happened on a Tuesday in March, in the main workshop after hours, with a spare development chassis that the build crew had prepped to Noah's specifications, which is to say, prepped with 3 specific, carefully designed faults, installed in locations that would read clean on every standard diagnostic, but would reveal themselves to anyone who approached the car as a physical object rather than a data source. Noah arrived at 6 p.m. with a folder and without a laptop. He'd asked everyone to leave their tablets in the engineering wing. He'd gotten 3 separate messages confirming this request, one from Marcus, one from Jin, and one from a second development engineer named Thomas, who'd added a question mark, suggesting he wasn't sure he'd understood correctly. He confirmed, no tablets, no laptops, no diagnostic interfaces. When he walked into the workshop, 5 people were standing around the development car with the slightly uncertain energy of engineers who have been asked to show up without their tools. Marcus was at the front, arms crossed, face professionally neutral. Jin Yara stood to his left with her hands in her jacket pockets, and the expression of someone actively trying not to look skeptical. Tomas was beside her, early 30s, compact, with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to take up less space in rooms where seniority mattered. 2 other development engineers completed the group, both younger, both visibly curious about what was happening. Noah set his folder on a tool cart and looked at the group for a moment. "Before we start," he said, "I want to tell you what this isn't. It isn't a test. There's no correct answer I'm grading you against. What we're doing tonight is practicing a way of seeing that's different from what you've been trained to do. You're going to be wrong. That's not a problem. That's the point." He looked at Marcus specifically. "That applies to everyone in the room equally." Marcus gave a small nod. Not warm, exactly, but genuine. "There are 3 faults in this car," Noah said. "I'm not going to tell you what they are or where they are. I'm going to ask you to find them using nothing but your eyes, your hands, and your knowledge of how this car is supposed to work when it's right. No data, no sensors, just you and the physical object." He paused. "You have 2 hours. Jinyara spoke first, which didn't surprise him. "How are we supposed to find faults without diagnostic data? If there's an electrical issue, Noah said, "it has a physical expression. Everything does. Electrical faults leave heat signatures, wear patterns, inconsistencies in connector seating, discoloration. They exist in the physical world, not just in the sensor world. The sensor tells you there's a problem, or in the worst cases fails to tell you at all. The car shows you." He paused. "Start with the car. Tell me what it shows you." Jin looked at the car, then at Marcus, then back at Noah, with the expression of someone setting aside a significant objection and deciding to proceed anyway. "Okay," she said. "Where do we start?" "Wherever feels right," Noah said. "That's not an evasion. I mean it literally. The first instinct is often more informative than we give it credit for. Where does your eye go?" The 2 hours that followed were the most instructive thing Noah had built in a teaching context since the Carter engineering years, and they were instructive in ways he hadn't entirely anticipated. The engineers found one of the 3 faults in the first 40 minutes. Tomas, working slowly along the left side of the chassis with his hands rather than his eyes, found a connector that didn't feel right, that had a micro-movement when he pressed it that it shouldn't have had. He almost dismissed it as within tolerance. He looked at Noah instead, and Noah said nothing, just waited, and Tomas pushed the connector again and said quietly, "That's wrong." "Write it down," Noah said. "What did you feel? Where? And what it told you? Be specific." The second fault took another 50 minutes. Jin found it, not by instinct, but by the methodical elimination process that she defaulted to under pressure, which was not wrong, but was slow. She found it in the end by crouching beside the rear section and looking at an area that nobody had initially examined because the diagnostic priority list would have ranked it low. There was a bearing housing with a wear pattern inconsistent with the car's mileage. Subtle, the kind of thing that would have shown up eventually in sensor data, but probably after it had caused a secondary failure. "How did you know to look there?" Noah asked. "I didn't," she said, which was the most honest thing she could have said. "I ran out of places I thought to look and started looking at places I didn't." "That's a method," Noah said. "Not a bad one." The third fault they didn't find. They ran out of time working around the differential assembly without quite landing on the specific issue, a grounding connection with a microfracture in the housing, seated correctly and passing every visual check but failing under load. Noah hadn't expected them to find it in a first session. He'd put it there for later. After the 2 hours, they sat on tool chests and on the workshop floor, and Noah walked them through what they'd found and what they'd missed and why. He didn't lecture. He asked questions and let the answers come from them, pushing where the answer was close and holding back when it needed more time. Marcus sat on a tool chest and participated the same as everyone else, and twice, once about the bearing housing, once about a visual inspection protocol, he said something that was wrong and corrected himself before Noah could, which meant he was actually working and not performing. At the end, Jinyara said. The third fault. The one we didn't find. Can you tell us what it was? Grounding connection, Noah said. Microfracture in the housing. Passes visual inspection. Fails under ignition load. The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite the opposite of one. We've seen that before, Tomas said slowly. Yes, Noah said. You have. He let that sit. He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't need to. The recognition was moving around the room at its own speed, landing differently on each person. The development engineers who joined after Valcourt were putting together a story they'd only heard fragments of. Jin was looking at Noah with an expression that had changed significantly from the skeptical but trying face she'd worn at the start of the evening. Marcus was looking at the car. Same fault type, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Similar, Noah said. Different car, different location, same category of problem. The kind that reads clean on diagnostics because the sensors measure state, not transition. The connector is seated. The housing is intact. The damage only expresses itself under specific load conditions, and by the time the sensor catches it, you're already in trouble. And the way to catch it before the sensor does, Jin said, is to look at the physical object, Noah said, with your hands if you can, to know the car well enough that you recognize when something feels wrong before you can articulate why. He paused. That's what we're building, that sense. It doesn't come from tonight. Tonight is one session, but this is where it starts. He drove home that evening feeling the specific tiredness that comes from doing something demanding in exactly the right way. Not the exhaustion of effort wasted, but the kind that means you spent something real. The sessions continued every 2 weeks through March and into April. The engineers got better fast, Jin especially, who turned out to have the physical intuition for it that her data-first training had partly obscured. By the fourth session, she was finding faults in under an hour that had taken the full 2 hours in the first session, and she was doing it with a confidence that was different from her initial confidence. Less defended, more grounded, the kind that comes from actually knowing rather than from protecting what you think you know. Thomas developed a habit of narrating his physical inspection process out loud, which initially seemed eccentric and turned out to be contagious. By the fifth session, most of the group was doing a version of it, a running quiet commentary on what their hands and eyes were telling them. Noah recognized it as a version of something he'd always done internally, externalized, and he said nothing about it because some things you let people discover rather than teach. Marcus was the slowest to change, which was predictable. He had the most invested in his existing method, and the most to lose from being visibly uncertain. But he was also, Noah noticed, the most careful about it. He was doing something that genuinely good engineers do and that most people don't. He was tracking his own errors, keeping a private record of the moments when his initial read had been wrong and the physical inspection had corrected it, building his own evidence base. He mentioned this to Noah on a phone call in early April, with the blunt directness of a person who doesn't do vulnerability easily and is doing it anyway because it's accurate. I've been wrong 11 times in 4 sessions, Marcus said, wrong in ways I wouldn't have been wrong if I'd started with the physical object instead of the data model. I've been logging it. That's good, Noah said. It's humbling, Marcus said. Same thing sometimes. A pause. You said in the first session that the smart ones are the hardest to train because they have more invested. Another pause. You were right. I was the hardest. You're also the one tracking your own errors in a spreadsheet, Noah said, which puts you ahead of anyone who isn't. A short silence. I have a question that's not about the training. Okay? Sophia, Marcus said, she talks about you differently than she talks about other consultants. Noah was quiet for a moment. He was in the garage between jobs sitting on the hood of a car that needed brake work. The spring afternoon was coming through the bay door in long, slanted lines, the particular light of April that makes everything look like it's been recently cleaned. I'm not sure that's a question, he said. It's not, Marcus admitted. It's more of an observation. A pause. She's good at the job. She's good at a lot of things. But she spends a lot of time being the CEO in a room full of people who see her as the CEO, which means she's performing the role more than she's actually in it sometimes. He paused again. She doesn't do that when she talks about you. Noah thought about the calls. The 11 minutes after Altamira. The way she'd sent 3 texts in quick succession because she was uncertain about something. The laugh that came out before she decided to allow it. Marcus, he said, why are you telling me this? Because I'm her chief engineer and she's my boss, and I've worked for her for 2 years, and I've never heard her call anyone Noah the way she says your name. A brief silence. And I'm telling you because I'm a direct person and I thought you should know, and also because if this is a thing that's going to happen, I'd rather know early so I can manage whatever it means for the team dynamic. It was possibly the least romantic declaration of observation Noah had ever encountered, which made it, in its own way, exactly right. I appreciate you telling me, he said. Are you going to do anything about it? I'm thinking about it. Good, Marcus said. That's all I needed to know. And then, without any transition, the session next Tuesday. I want to add a fault to the sequence. Something from the Melbourne data. Can we discuss the parameters? They discussed the parameters. After he hung up, Noah sat on the hood of the car with the April light coming in and thought about things he'd been filing carefully for months. About the specific quality of those phone calls. About the fact that he looked forward to them. About Lily saying, if you already know the answer, it's not actually a question. He knew the answer. He'd known it for a while. He just hadn't been sure what to do with knowing it, because the last time he'd known something this clearly about his own interior life had been 28 years old and a woman named Sarah. And what had happened after that had changed every coordinate he navigated by. He wasn't 28 anymore. And this was a different kind of knowing, quieter, slower, more examined. The kind that had survived 4 months of professional contact and honest conversation and had come out the other side still true. He called Sophia on a Thursday evening in mid-April, which was not their usual call day, and she picked up on the second ring with the slight note of concern in her voice that he'd come to recognize, that the fraction of alarm that appeared when a call came outside the expected pattern. Is everything okay? She asked. Yeah, he said. Everything's fine. He paused. I wanted to ask you something that's not about the program or the team. A silence. Not uncomfortable, just present. Okay, she said carefully. Marcus told me something, he said. And before I say what it was, I want to be clear that I'm not asking because of what Marcus said. I'm asking because it's true for me, and I've been not asking for about 4 months, which is probably longer than I needed to wait. Another silence. He could hear her breathing, which told him she was paying full attention and not moving around. There's a restaurant in Valcourt, he said, on the east side near the old market. I've driven past it a few times. It looks like the kind of place that's been there for 30 years and knows what it's doing. He paused. I'd like to take you to dinner there. Not a team dinner, not a consulting discussion, just dinner. The silence that followed was the longest one in the history of their phone calls. Then, Marcus told you I talk about you differently. He did. I'm going to have a conversation with him about professional boundaries. He'd probably survive it, Noah said. She made a sound that was almost, not quite, a laugh. I need to ask you something first, she said. Okay. Lily, she said, I'm not asking to insert myself anywhere I don't belong, but she matters, and whatever this is, she's the most important variable in it, and I want to know that you've thought about that. He had thought about it. He thought about it the most of any part of it because it was the part that required the most care. Lily was 9 now. She'd had her birthday in March, and the party had involved 7 of her school friends and a specific ice cream cake she'd been planning since January. She was old enough to notice things, and young enough that what she noticed would shape things in ways she wasn't yet aware of. But she was also the child who had asked him whether he already knew the answer, and she was the child who had said that nice is harder than people think, and she was the child who had 2 weeks ago said completely unprompted over dinner, Dad, do you think you'll ever have a friend? Like, a real one? He'd asked her what she meant. Someone who calls you and you're actually happy about it, she'd said. Not like when Mrs. Patterson calls and you make the face. He'd asked what face. She'd demonstrated. It was unfortunately accurate. I've thought about Lily, he told Sophia. A lot. And I think the honest answer is that I can't promise anything about how that goes, because I don't know yet, and neither do you. But I can tell you that I wouldn't be asking if I thought it was wrong for her. She comes first. That's not going to change. He paused. And I think she'd like you. She asks good questions and you give straight answers. She responds well to that. Another silence. He waited. The restaurant on the east side, Sophia said, near the old market. Yeah. Saturday? Saturday works, he said. Okay, she said. And then quieter. Noah, I'm glad you called on a Thursday. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, Me too. Lily, when he told her the next morning over breakfast, told her simply, without performance or excessive explanation, the way he'd learned to tell her things, turned her spoon in her cereal bowl twice before responding. Is she the one from the racing team? She asked. Yes. The one you said was nice? That one. She considered this for a moment with the focused seriousness she applied to anything that actually mattered. Are you nervous? She asked. A little, he said, because it was true. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something. That's probably good, she said. Miss Renner says if you're not nervous about something, it means you don't care about it. Ms. Renner says a lot of things. She's right about most of them. Lily pointed her spoon at him with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. You should wear the blue shirt, not the navy one with the stain. The other blue one. I wasn't asking for... I know, she said, and went back to her cereal. He wore the other blue one. Saturday dinner was at a restaurant that had been in the same building for 34 years, run by a family that had kept the menu almost unchanged for the last 20 of them, on the grounds that if something works, you don't fix it. The lighting was the kind that makes everything look like it was painted by someone who understood warmth. The tables were too close together, the way old restaurants always are, which meant you kept your voice at a level that created a kind of forced intimacy. Sophia arrived 3 minutes after Noah, which was the first time in their relationship that she had not been early for something, and she said, before she sat down, I left the facility 20 minutes late. I was reviewing a contract amendment and I lost track of time, which I don't normally do. It's 3 minutes, he said. I know. I'm noting it for the record. She sat down. She was wearing something that was not a team jacket, which was the first time he'd seen her without one, and she looked like a person who existed outside of work rather than someone who had emerged from it, which she was. He'd just never seen the evidence before. You look nervous, he said. I am nervous, she said. I run an $18 million racing operation, and I'm nervous about dinner, which is not my finest moment. I told Lily I was nervous this morning, he said. She said it was probably good, that it means you care. Sophia looked at him. Something in her face shifted into something more open, the way faces do when a wall comes down, rather than when a door opens. Suddenly and completely, rather than by degrees. She sounds like someone who says the right thing at the right time, she said. Constantly, he said. It's slightly alarming. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Not because either of them was performing enjoyment, it simply ran that way, the way good conversations do when the people having them have been talking around a thing for months and are finally talking at it. They talked about the program, briefly, and then stopped talking about the program and talked about other things. About her father, who had built the team over 20 years and handed it to her with the particular complicated love of a parent who can't quite decide whether they're proud or concerned. About what it had been like to take over at 27. The specific loneliness of leadership. The way rooms change when you walk into them as the person responsible for everything in them. About Sarah, because Noah brought it up, which surprised him slightly. He rarely brought it up, having learned that most people didn't know how to hold it comfortably. But Sophia listened the way she did everything, directly, without flinching, without performing sensitivity. She asked one question at the end, which was, what do you miss most? He thought about it honestly, which took a moment. The way she argued, he said, she wasn't easy to disagree with, not because she got upset, but because she was usually right, and she knew it, and she was patient enough to wait for you to catch up. He paused. Lily got that, word for word. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She sounds like she would have been someone worth knowing. She was, he said. And then, Because it was true and he'd learned to say true things. She would have liked you. You're direct the same way she was. You don't wait for permission to say what you mean. Sophia looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a professional context. It wasn't in a professional context, he said. No, she said. I know. They walked out of the restaurant at 9:30 into a clear April night, the kind of cold that's more spring than winter but hasn't completely decided yet. The old market was closed at that hour, but the street was still lit, the shop windows making yellow rectangles on the pavement. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the way people stand when neither of them is quite ready to end something, but neither has the obvious next step. The program? Sophia said. It's working. I want you to know that outside of all the professional feedback, I've seen it work in how the team moves. Jin found a fault last week in a car that was going into storage for the off-season, something that would have been a problem next spring. She found it by hand before we ran any diagnostics. She called Marcus, and Marcus called me, and the way he said it, she paused. He said, "We're learning to read the car instead of the map. I think that's yours." The territory always wins, Noah said. Is that the full version? Data is the map, he said. The car is the territory. The territory always wins. It was the first line I ever wrote for the program, when I was 33 and thought I had time to finish it. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that he'd come to recognize as her real one, not the CEO version, not the professional one, but the particular directness of a person whose first instinct is always to see clearly rather than to protect herself from what she sees. You finished it, she said. Eventually, he said. She laughed. It carried down the street into the quiet April night. They said goodnight at her car. Simply, without ceremony, with the specific ease of two people who have arrived somewhere they both recognize without needing to name it yet. She drove south toward the facility. He drove north toward Maple Street. He got home at 10:15. The house was quiet. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was sitting on the couch with her phone, doing the relaxed waiting of a babysitter who'd had an uneventful evening, and she collected her jacket and left with a cheerful wave and the assurance that Lily had gone to bed on time without argument, which Noah knew was not quite true, but appreciated the diplomacy of. He checked on Lily. She was asleep in the complete way children are asleep when they've actually tired themselves out. Face relaxed, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress in a way that suggested she'd been moving around before sleep claimed her. The lamp on the nightstand was still on. He turned it off. On her nightstand beside the lamp was the chess set she'd been working on. A problem she'd set herself, pieces arranged mid-game, a sticky note beside it with her own handwriting that said, "Finish tomorrow. Don't move." Under the sticky note, another piece of paper. He almost left it, but the edge of it showed what looked like a drawing, and Lily's drawings were... He always looked at them. He picked it up. It was a drawing of a car, a race car, roughly rendered in colored pencil with the specific detail that 9-year-olds put into things they actually care about. The body lines approximate but committed. The wheels oversized in the way that makes cartoon cars look like they mean business. Beside the car, a stick figure in a blue shirt with what was unmistakably a small oil stain on the collar, which told him she was working from specific observation. The figure was holding something, too small to make out clearly, but shaped like a wrench. Underneath, in her handwriting, "Dad fixing the race car. The one that went." He stood in the doorway of her room for a long time, looking at it. The car that went. He set the drawing carefully back under the sticky note, exactly where it had been, and went to the kitchen and made tea he didn't really need, and sat at the table in the quiet house with the April night outside the window. He thought about everything that had happened in the 5 months since a phone call from Dennis Park on a Tuesday morning. The grounding connection, the engine roaring to life, walking out of the garage without looking back, and the radio on the drive home, and Lily at the kitchen island asking him to tell her the whole thing at dinner. He thought about the program and the development engineers and Marcus logging his errors in a spreadsheet. He thought about Jin Yara finding a fault by hand, alone, with no sensor data, calling it correctly from the physical evidence alone. He thought about a restaurant that had been in the same building for 34 years and knew what it was doing. He thought about what it means to walk away from something you're good at, and whether walking away is always the same as letting it go, and whether you can hold something down in yourself for long enough that it changes, not into something smaller, but into something that knows how to fit alongside everything else you've become. He was 32 years old. He was a mechanic and a father, and apparently, again, an engineer, in the specific way that engineers are engineers, even when they're doing something else. He had a daughter who drew race cars with the people she loved standing next to them. He had an arrangement with a racing team that he'd agreed to because the right question asked at the right moment is sometimes enough. He had a training program that was teaching 3 junior engineers to read a car instead of a model of a car, and a chief engineer who was keeping a spreadsheet of his own mistakes, which was, in its own way, a kind of courage. He had, maybe, the beginning of something else. He wasn't sure yet what to call it. He knew it was real, which was enough for now. The thing about problems that look impossible, he'd been saying this for 20 years in one form or another to drivers and engineers and anyone who would listen, is that they're almost never actually impossible. They're just hiding their solution in a place nobody's thought to look. The answer is in the physical object, not in the model of it. Stop reading the data. Look at the actual thing in front of you. Ask the question everyone else has skipped. He'd said it so many times that he'd stopped hearing it as anything other than professional advice. It had taken 4 years and a dead race car and an 8-year-old who argued with established answers to understand that it applied to everything. Not just cars, not just sensors and circuits and diagnostic readouts. Everything. The life you're actually living versus the version of it you've been using as a map. The person you've become versus the version of yourself you lost track of somewhere along the way. The things that are still real even when the model says they shouldn't be. Territory always wins. He finished the tea. He washed the mug. He turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the dark of the house, listening to it breathe the way houses breathe at night. The small sounds of a structure settling, the faint movement of air, the deep quiet of everyone in it asleep. Then he went to bed. In the morning, Lily would be at the kitchen table before him, which she always was now, as though she had decided at some point without announcing it that mornings were her jurisdiction. She would have strong opinions about breakfast and the chess problem and something that had happened at school that he didn't know about yet. She would ask questions he hadn't thought to ask himself. She would say something that he would carry for days without quite knowing why. And at some point in the day, probably mid-morning between jobs, in the way that had become its own kind of routine, his phone would ring, and he would look at the screen, and he would be glad about what he saw there. That was enough. That was, in the precise and unadorned sense of the word, everything. He closed his eyes in the dark of the ordinary house on Maple Street and slept.